A Jedi's eyes flicker, then burn gold with corruption. Ancient temple stones crack and crumble under invisible force. A binary star system tears itself apart, consuming billions in an instant of stellar fury. Civilizations that stood for millennia, reduced to ash and echo. The Senate Hall of Coruscant runs red with blood as a chancellor screams words not his own. This is not fiction. This is history. For 6,000 years, the galaxy burned, not in one great war, but in an endless cycle of darkness rising, consuming, falling, only to rise again transformed. Jedi became monsters, students murdered masters, entire star systems vanished from star charts, and through it all, one question echoed unanswered across the millennia. Does darkness create fallen Jedi, or do fallen Jedi create darkness? Tonight, you will witness the answer. You will walk through the Valley of the Dark Lords on Corriban, where wind howls through tombs older than most civilizations. You will stand on Coruscant as the Sith hammer at the Senate doors. You will feel the moment a noble protector crosses the line and becomes the very evil they swore to destroy. But here is what the Jedi Archives never tell you. Deep in the forbidden section, sealed behind warnings and force locks, lies a holocron. Inside, a secret so profound that knowing it changes everything, a pattern the Jedi Council themselves fear to acknowledge, and by the end of tonight you will understand why some knowledge is deemed too dangerous to share. So before you settle in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I create here. And here is something interesting. 62% of you watching right now haven't subscribed yet. If this content helps you sleep or fascinates you with Star Wars lore, consider hitting that subscribe button. It genuinely helps me continue creating these deep dives into galactic history. Drop a comment telling me where you are in the world right now and what time it is where you are. Each comment reminds me that we are all connected through these ancient stories. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Get into your blanket, and let's ease into tonight's journey together, back through 6 millennia to when the Jedi Order first learned that their greatest enemy would always come from within. You sit in silence within the Jedi Archives on Coruscant. The chamber stretches above you, carved from ancient stone reaching up into shadows that even the soft blue glow of holocrons cannot penetrate. Dust motes drift lazily through shafts of pale light, each particle taking hours to fall from ceiling to floor. The air smells of preserved manuscripts, of knowledge maintained across millennia, of secrets kept and secrets buried. This is the heart of Jedi wisdom, and you are here to study its darkest corners. Your name is not important. Your rank matters little. What defines you now is your purpose. You are a Jedi Archivist, one of the few granted access to the forbidden sections, the sealed histories, the records the Council deems too dangerous for most to witness. For months, you have requested permission to study the cyclical nature of Sith resurgence, to understand why, despite being defeated again and again, the darkness always returns. Finally, permission was granted, but with conditions and warnings. Your mentor, Master Atra, stands near the chamber entrance, her face unreadable in the dim light. She is keeper of dark knowledge, guardian of forbidden holocrons, the one who decides who may walk close to the abyss and who must stay safely distant. Her voice carries the weight of experience and loss. To understand darkness, you must walk close to its edge, she said, when bringing you here. But remember, many who studied what you are about to witness never returned the same. Some never returned at all. Your hands rest on the sealed container before you. Inside waits a holocron older than most galactic governments. Its surface is smooth black stone, carved with warnings in ancient Jedi script. The seal itself required 3 masters to unlock. The container's interior glows faintly red, though the holocron itself remains dormant, waiting. You have your reasons for this research. Personal reasons that burn quietly in your heart. Somewhere in the wars you are about to witness, your ancestor fell to the dark side. Their name was struck from all records, erased as though they never existed. Only a single notation remains in the deepest archives: fallen, lost, forgotten. But you remember, your family remembers, and you carry the question that has haunted your bloodline for generations. Was their fall inevitable? Could it have been prevented? Or does every Jedi carry within them the seed of their own destruction, waiting only for the right circumstances to bloom into darkness? The forbidden section surrounds you. Shelves upon shelves of sealed holocrons stretch into the gloom. Each one contains warnings the Council deemed too dangerous. Each one holds knowledge that could illuminate or corrupt. Each one represents a Jedi who fell, a Sith who rose, a war that consumed billions. You have studied the approved histories, the sanitized accounts, the versions that make the Jedi look wise and the Sith look simply evil. But you know history is never that simple. Good people do terrible things. Noble intentions pave roads to unimaginable horror. And sometimes, the only difference between hero and monster is a single choice made in a single moment of weakness. Your fingers trace the seal on the container. The Force hums around you, neither encouraging nor warning, simply present and waiting. Master Atris watches from across the chamber, her expression impossible to read. She has seen other archivists open these records. She knows what comes next. The seal breaks with a soft hiss. The container opens. The holocron rises slowly, rotating in midair, its black surface beginning to glow from within. Red light pulses in rhythmic patterns, like a heartbeat, like a warning, like an invitation. Then it speaks. The voice is ancient, the accent archaic, the words themselves requiring a moment to pass. But the meaning becomes clear. This is Master Vodo Siosk Baez, Jedi Master from 4,000 years ago, teacher of Exar Kun, witness to the Great Sith War. His voice carries sorrow deeper than oceans. If you are hearing this, you seek to understand the darkness. Very well. But know this, what you learn cannot be unlearned. What you see cannot be unseen. And when you understand why we fall, you may find yourself standing closer to the edge than you ever imagined possible. The holocron's light intensifies, and suddenly you are no longer in the archives. You are standing on Coruscant, but Coruscant as it was 7,000 years ago, younger, smaller, with temple spires reaching toward clearer skies, and in the council chambers ahead, voices are rising in anger. Jedi arguing with Jedi, philosophy becoming accusation, debate transforming into something far more dangerous. Master Atris's voice reaches you from across time and space. Remember your training. Observe. Do not participate. Learn. Do not judge. And above all, remember, you are watching history. Do not let it consume you. The vision solidifies around you. You feel warm wind on your face, smell the gardens below, hear the raised voices clearly now, and you understand. This is where it began. This is the moment the darkness was born, not from evil, but from curiosity. Not from hate, but from the simple, terrible question. What if we could be stronger? The second great schism is about to begin, and with it, 6,000 years of war. Betrayal, fallen heroes, and risen monsters. The cycle that would shape the galaxy, the pattern the Jedi still struggle to break. You take a breath, center yourself in the Force, and step forward into history, into legend, into the darkness that began with light. 7,003 years before the Battle of Yavin, Coruscant gleamed as the crown jewel of galactic civilization. The Jedi Temple stood proud, its spires catching the morning light, reflecting the confidence of an order that had maintained peace for generations. Thousands of Jedi walked its halls, studied its libraries, meditated in its gardens. They believed themselves guardians of absolute truth, protectors of an unchanging path between the light and the void. But truth, like stone, can crack. In the deeper chambers where masters debated philosophy and shaped the future of their order, a question arose that would shatter everything. A group of Jedi scholars, brilliant minds who had devoted decades to studying the Force in all its manifestations, began to challenge the fundamental restrictions of the Jedi Code. Their leader's name has been erased from every record, scrubbed so thoroughly that not even a whisper remains. Perhaps the Council feared that remembering him would give his ideas immortality. Perhaps they understood too late that martyrdom often serves rebellion better than victory ever could. These scholars argued with the passion of those who believe themselves enlightened rather than corrupted. They gathered in private chambers, sharing texts that the Council had deemed too dangerous for general study. Ancient manuscripts from the dawn of the Republic, from civilizations that had risen and fallen before the Jedi even existed. In these forgotten writings, they discovered techniques that promised power beyond anything the modern order taught. The Force, they insisted, was not meant to be caged by fear. Emotion did not weaken a Force user, but strengthened them. Passion gave focus. Anger provided clarity. Love offered motivation beyond simple duty. The Jedi Code, they claimed, was built on the cowardice of those too afraid to reach for their full potential. For months the debate remained civil. Council chambers echoed with arguments that grew increasingly heated but never crossed into open hostility. Traditional Jedi pointed to millennia of wisdom, to the countless times throughout galactic history when those who embraced emotion had fallen into darkness and destroyed everything they touched. The scholars countered with their own logic. How could the Jedi truly understand the Force when they deliberately blinded themselves to half of its nature? How could they claim to be guardians when they refused to acknowledge the full spectrum of what they guarded? Fear, they said, was the real path to darkness, and the Council's fear of emotion proved their point more eloquently than any argument. But philosophy remained theory until they began to experiment. In hidden laboratories beneath the temple itself, the scholars applied their newfound knowledge. They had discovered references to something called Sith alchemy in texts so ancient that most Jedi assumed they described myth rather than history. These techniques allowed Force users to manipulate life itself at the cellular level, to reshape living tissue according to their will, to create entirely new forms of existence. The first experiments were subtle: enhanced healing, accelerated growth in plants, small manipulations that seemed beneficial, even noble in their application. But each success demanded the next step. Each breakthrough revealed new possibilities that whispered temptation in increasingly seductive tones. They captured creatures from Coruscant's lower levels, animals that no one would miss. In the beginning, they told themselves this was research, not cruelty. They were expanding the boundaries of what the Force could accomplish. Surely the Council would understand once they saw the results. But the creatures they created began to change. Mutations spread beyond what they had intended. Flesh twisted into configurations that seemed to scream even when the beings made no sound. Eyes multiplied or vanished entirely. Limbs grew in impossible places or dissolved into appendages that served no comprehensible purpose. The scholars told themselves these were merely growing pains, the inevitable setbacks of pioneering work. They doubled their efforts, convinced that mastery lay just beyond the next experiment, the next breakthrough, the next sacrifice. The Jedi Council discovered the laboratories by accident. A maintenance worker, investigating strange sounds in the sub-levels, opened a door that should have remained sealed. What he found sent him screaming back to the surface, his mind barely intact. His description of twisted flesh and unnatural life too horrific for most to believe. The council descended immediately. What they witnessed in those hidden chambers broke something fundamental in their understanding of their own order. These were not strangers or infiltrators. These were Jedi colleagues they had trained beside, debated with, trusted, and they had created abominations that defied every principle the Order held sacred. The confrontation that followed made the earlier debates seem like gentle disagreements. The council demanded immediate cessation of all experiments. The creatures were to be destroyed. The scholars were to submit to judgment and accept whatever consequences the Order deemed appropriate. The scholars refused. They saw no crime in their research. They had caused no harm to any sentient being. They argued. The creatures they experimented upon were merely animals, and the knowledge gained justified any temporary suffering. More importantly, they insisted, they were on the verge of breakthroughs that would revolutionize what the Jedi could accomplish, healing that could cure any disease, enhancement that could make every Jedi 10 times more effective in their mission of protecting the galaxy, the ability to create life itself, to fill barren worlds with thriving ecosystems. The Council issued an ultimatum: stop immediately or face exile from the Order. The scholars chose exile, but they did not choose peace. 7,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the 100-year darkness began. The first battle erupted in the temple itself. The scholars, realizing the council would not permit them to leave peacefully, unleashed their creations. Creatures that had once been ordinary animals now stood twice the height of a human, covered in armor-like scales that deflected lightsaber strikes. Others moved with impossible speed, their bodies enhanced beyond natural limitation. Some breathed fire, others secreted acids that dissolved stone. Jedi fought Jedi in halls meant for meditation and learning. Lightsabers clashed against lightsabers for the first time in generations. Masters faced students they had trained, forced to strike down those they had once called friends. The ancient floors, worn smooth by millennia of peaceful footsteps, became slick with blood. The scholars and their followers fought their way to the hangar, commandeering ships and fleeing into orbit. But this was no retreat. It was regrouping. They had tasted power beyond what the traditional Jedi could imagine, and they had no intention of surrendering it. Within weeks, the conflict spread beyond Coruscant. The scholars recruited disillusioned Jedi from across the galaxy, promising them liberation from outdated restrictions, offering them the chance to become something greater than the Council's vision allowed. Young Padawans, frustrated by the slow pace of traditional training, joined in surprising numbers. Even some knights, who had served faithfully for years, found themselves drawn to promises of accelerated mastery. The war would last a century. Entire planets would choose sides. Civilizations would fall. And by the end, the definition of what it meant to be Jedi would be forever changed. But standing there in the council chambers, watching the first blood spill, none of them understood yet what they had begun. They thought this was a philosophical disagreement that would be resolved through demonstration of superior wisdom. They had no idea they were birthing the Sith. The war consumed 100 years. Not a single continuous battle, but waves of conflict that rolled across the galaxy like a tide that never fully receded. The Dark Jedi, as they came to be called, proved far more difficult to defeat than anyone had anticipated. Their experiments had not stopped with creating war beasts. They had learned to enhance themselves, pushing their bodies beyond natural limits, channeling the Force through emotion in ways that gave them terrifying bursts of power. But power fueled by passion burns hot and fast. It consumes the user as readily as it consumes the enemy. The traditional Jedi, fighting from a place of centered calm, proved more sustainable in the long campaign. They did not burn as brightly, but neither did they burn out. The final confrontation came on Korbos, a world whose name would be remembered only for the battle that scarred it. The Dark Jedi assembled their full strength, determined to break the Jedi Order once and for all. They brought their greatest creations, leviathans bred from combining dozens of species, towering beasts whose roars could shatter stone, terrantakes, creatures specifically designed to hunt Force users, drinking their power even as they tore them apart, shadow beasts that could move through walls and strike from nowhere. The battle lasted 3 days. The sky turned red with dust and blood. Lightning storms, both natural and Force-generated, hammered the battlefield without pause. Jedi Masters fell. Dark Jedi Lords perished. The creatures, many of them, turned on their own creators when control was lost in the chaos. By the end, the Dark Jedi had lost, not through wisdom or superior philosophy, but through simple attrition. Unity proved stronger than individual power. Coordination defeated chaos. The survivors, numbered at only 12 Dark Jedi of significant rank, along with perhaps 200 followers, found themselves surrounded, exhausted, defeated. The Jedi Council faced an impossible question. What punishment fits those who were once your brothers and sisters? These were not ordinary criminals. They were Jedi who had devoted their lives to the Order before taking a different path. They had committed atrocities, yes, but they had done so believing themselves enlightened rather than corrupted. Execution seemed wrong. The Jedi were not executioners. They protected life, even life that had turned against them. But allowing the Dark Jedi to remain in known space was equally impossible. Their ideas were too seductive, their techniques too tempting. As long as they existed within reach, they would continue to recruit, to corrupt, to spread their philosophy like a virus through the Order. The Council chose exile, permanent, irrevocable exile into the unknown regions where no Republic charts reached. The Dark Jedi would be given ships, supplies for the journey, and a stern warning. If they ever returned to known space, if they ever made contact with the Republic again, they would be hunted down and destroyed without mercy or hesitation. The 12 Dark Jedi Lords were stripped of their rank, their names struck from all records, their accomplishments erased as though they had never existed. They were loaded onto colony ships along with their remaining followers and what creatures had survived the war. No one wished them safe journey. No one said farewell. They simply watched as the ships entered hyperspace on randomly generated coordinates, pointed toward the galactic edge where stars grew sparse and civilization had never reached. The Jedi returned to Coruscant, believing the threat ended. The exiles traveled through hyperspace for months. Their ships, not designed for such extended journeys, began to fail. Systems broke down. Supplies dwindled faster than anticipated. The creatures confined in 2 small cargo holds grew aggressive and had to be destroyed to protect the crew. By the time they finally emerged from hyperspace, exhausted and depleted, the exiles had been reduced to fewer than half their original numbers. But they had arrived somewhere. Sensors detected a star system with habitable planets. As their failing ships limped toward the nearest world, they observed signs of civilization, primitive by Republic standards, but civilization nonetheless. Structures visible from orbit, energy signatures indicating fire and basic metallurgy, and something else. Something that made every surviving Force user aboard the ship suddenly pay attention. The Force was strong here. Incredibly strong. This world was a nexus, a place where the Force flowed more powerfully than almost anywhere they had ever encountered. The planet was called Korriban by its inhabitants. A harsh world of red sand and darker stone, where the sun beat down mercilessly during the day and temperatures plummeted viciously at night. The Sith species who lived here had adapted to the extremes. Red-skinned, often with bone protrusions and facial tendrils, they were a warrior culture that had unified their world through conquest and maintained it through ritual combat. More importantly, they were Force-sensitive. Not every individual, but enough that their priests and leaders wielded abilities they attributed to their gods. Dark gods. Gods of strength and domination. Gods who promised power to those worthy and death to those weak. When 12 ships descended from the sky, glowing with energy beyond anything the Sith had ever witnessed, when the beings who emerged could move objects with thought and command lightning from clear skies, when they demonstrated power that made their priests look like children playing with toys, the Sith species did the only logical thing. They declared the newcomers divine. They prostrated themselves. They offered everything they possessed and everything they were. The exiled Dark Jedi, who had spent 100 years being called traitors and monsters, who had been stripped of rank and name and cast into the void, suddenly found themselves worshipped as gods. The temptation was too perfect to resist. The validation too complete. Everything the Jedi Council had told them was wrong appeared to be disproven. Here was a species that recognized power and wisdom when they saw it. Here was a culture that understood strength was not evil, but simply reality. The exile whose name had been erased from Jedi records, the one who had led the original scholars in their research, took a new name and a new title. He declared himself Ajunta Pal, and the Sith species crowned him their first Dark Lord. The other 11 exiles became Sith Lords beneath him, each taking a portion of the planet to rule, each establishing their own domain and beginning their own experiments. They no longer needed to hide their research. They no longer faced judgment for their ambitions. The Sith species brought them everything they requested: test subjects, resources, labor to build whatever structures they envisioned. Over the following decades, as the Dark Jedi intermarried with the Sith species, a new civilization began to emerge. Hybrid children, combining the force potential of fallen Jedi with the raw strength and cultural ruthlessness of the Sith species. These children would be raised in a philosophy that valued power above all else, that saw compassion as weakness and mercy as failure. Construction began on massive temple tombs in what would become known as the Valley of the Dark Lords. Each Dark Lord designed their own eternal resting place, structures meant to inspire awe and terror in equal measure. Pyramids of dark stone, rising from red sand, statues carved to dwarf any observer, entrance halls designed to make visitors feel small, insignificant, prey. The Sith species had always valued strength, but the fallen Jedi brought structure to that value. They created an academy to train Force sensitives. They developed a philosophy that justified every action through the lens of personal power. They wrote a code, a direct inversion of the Jedi Code they had once followed. Peace is a lie. There is only passion. Through passion, I gain strength. Through strength, I gain power. Through power, I gain victory. Through victory, my chains are broken. The Force shall free me. The Jedi Council, thousands of light years away, believed their problem solved. The dangerous elements had been removed. The Order could return to its traditional path without distraction or temptation. They had no idea what they had created. They could not imagine that their act of mercy would birth an enemy that would haunt the galaxy for millennia. The Sith Empire was being born in exile and isolation, growing stronger with each generation, building fleets and armies and philosophies, all while nursing a hatred for the Jedi that had cast them out. 6,900 years would pass before the Republic learned of their mistake. By then, it would be far too late to prevent what was coming. For 18 centuries, the Sith Empire grew in isolation beyond the edges of known space. Korriban remained their sacred world, but the Empire expanded to encompass dozens of systems, each one bent to serve the vision of their Dark Lords. On Zaost, a world of ice and stone, where frozen winds howled between black towers, they established their political capital. The cold there focused the mind, sharpened the will, reminded everyone constantly that only the strong survived. The Sith purebloods, as they came to be called, maintained their position as the ruling class. The original bloodlines of the Sith species mixed with the genetics of the exiled Dark Jedi created beings of remarkable force potential. But the Empire did not limit itself to a single species. Conquered races were assessed for usefulness. Some were enslaved for labor. Others were recruited as soldiers. The most force-sensitive were offered the chance to train at the Sith Academy, though they would always serve beneath the purebloods in the hierarchy. Korriban itself transformed into a tomb world, a place of pilgrimage where every Sith Lord aspired to build their final resting place. The Valley of the Dark Lords grew crowded with massive structures. Each generation tried to outdo the previous in grandeur and terror. Statues the size of mountains, temples that stretched underground for kilometers, burial chambers filled with traps and puzzles and horrors designed to test anyone who dared disturb the eternal rest of those interred within. The Sith Academy trained thousands. Young acolytes arrived from across the Empire, each one hoping to achieve the rank of Sith Lord, each one willing to do whatever necessary to survive the brutal training. The Academy did not coddle or protect. Students were expected to compete constantly, to sabotage each other, to prove their strength by destroying anyone weaker. The philosophy was simple and merciless. If you die during training, you were not worthy to become Sith. Classes covered lightsaber combat, force techniques, ancient history, and the application of Sith alchemy. Students learned to channel their emotions as fuel, to transform rage into lightning, fear into strength, hatred into focus. They studied the tombs of ancient Dark Lords, learning from holocrons that preserved the wisdom of those long dead. Each holocron was a test in itself, for many were designed to corrupt or destroy unworthy students who accessed them. But the golden age of the Sith was not constant expansion and conquest. The Dark Lords understood that premature contact with the Republic would be disastrous. They were not ready. The Republic was vast, its resources seemingly infinite. The Jedi Order, whatever its flaws, remained powerful and vigilant. An early war would result in the same defeat that had driven the original exiles from known space. So they waited. And while they waited, they built shipyards, constructed fleets in secret. Breeding programs created armies of soldiers loyal unto death. Sith sorcerers developed new force techniques, refining what the original exiles had begun, pushing the boundaries of what darkness could accomplish. They learned to drain life from their enemies to sustain themselves, to create illusions so perfect that entire fleets could be conjured from nothing, to manipulate minds across vast distances. The internal politics of the Empire were vicious. Sith Lords assassinated rivals constantly, each one scheming to increase their power and position, but these conflicts were contained, controlled, almost ritualized. A lord who grew too weak would be replaced by their apprentice. An apprentice who grew strong enough would challenge their master. This constant turnover was not seen as weakness, but as natural selection. Only the strongest survived to rule, and the strongest were exactly who should be ruling. Peace, of a sort, reigned for centuries at a time, under particularly powerful Dark Lords. Marka Ragnos stood out, even among the legendary figures of Sith history. He claimed the title of Dark Lord in the year 5100, before the Battle of Yavin, and held it for over a century through sheer dominance. Under his rule, the Sith Empire reached the height of its power and influence. Territory expanded cautiously, but consistently. Scouts explored the unknown regions, mapping routes that might someday lead back to Republic space. Spies infiltrated the edges of known space, gathering information about the Republic, learning about technological advances, identifying potential weaknesses. The Sith were patient. They could afford to be. Time favored them. With each passing generation, they grew stronger, while the Republic grew complacent. Sith culture developed its own unique character during these centuries. Their architecture favored sharp angles and imposing verticality, structures designed to make observers feel small and vulnerable. Sith art depicted conquest and domination, celebrated strength, glorified victory. Even their music, when they created it, utilized minor keys and dissonant harmonies that evoked unease rather than comfort. The Sith language evolved as well. Words were guttural, harsh, powerful when spoken aloud. Phrases often had multiple meanings, encouraging deception and misdirection even in casual conversation. To speak Sith was to engage in a form of combat, every word chosen for maximum impact, every sentence a potential weapon. Their relationship with the Force differed fundamentally from the Jedi approach, where Jedi sought to serve the Force to be instruments of its will. The Sith sought to dominate it. The Force was a tool to be mastered, a resource to be exploited. They did not meditate to find inner peace, but to hone their connection, to make their will so strong that the Force itself would bend to accommodate their desires. This philosophy created Force users of terrifying power, but also of fundamental instability. Sith Lords who grew too powerful often consumed themselves, their bodies unable to contain the dark side energies they channeled. Some transformed physically, their flesh warping under the constant exposure to corruption. Eyes turned yellow, then red. Skin paled or darkened. Voices changed, becoming deeper or acquiring an unnatural echo. But for those who survived the transformation, who learned to balance on the knife edge between power and destruction, the rewards were extraordinary. Sith Lords could live far longer than natural lifespans should allow, sustaining themselves through the Force. They could survive injuries that would kill ordinary beings. Some even learned to transfer their consciousness into new bodies when their original forms finally failed, achieving a form of immortality through parasitic possession. Yet despite all this power, despite centuries of preparation and countless advantages, the Sith Empire understood one truth above all others: they could not defeat the Republic through military might alone. The galaxy was too vast, the Republic too entrenched. What they needed was opportunity, a moment of vulnerability, a chance to strike when the Republic least expected it. Marka Ragnos, for all his power, never launched that attack. He understood that the Empire was not quite ready, that one more generation of building would make the difference between glorious victory and devastating defeat. He died peacefully, if such a word can be applied to a Dark Lord, having expanded the Empire to its greatest extent while maintaining the discipline to wait for the perfect moment. His death created a succession crisis. Two Sith Lords emerged as primary contenders for his throne. Ludo Kresh, conservative and cautious, argued for continuing Ragnos's patient approach. Naga Sadow, ambitious and aggressive, insisted the time for waiting had passed. The Empire was ready. The Republic had grown soft. Victory was theirs for the taking. At Ragnos's funeral, with his body laid out in state within his massive tomb, Kresh and Sadow dueled for the right to succeed him. Their battle shook the valley, both warriors channeling immense power through the Force. Lightning scarred the stone. The very air seemed to ignite. Neither could achieve decisive victory. The Sith Council, watching the duel, found themselves unable to choose between the two philosophies represented. And then, as if summoned by destiny, or perhaps just cruel coincidence, two ships dropped out of hyperspace directly over Korriban, ships from the Republic. The first contact between Sith and Republic in nearly 2,000 years. Naga Sadow saw his opportunity, and he took it. 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, two siblings made a decision that would kill billions. Gav and Jory Daragon were hyperspace explorers, a profession that sounds far more glamorous than the reality. They owned a single battered freighter, the Starbreaker 12, and they owed money to virtually everyone on Chorus Major who had been foolish enough to extend them credit. Their plan was simple, in the way that terrible plans often are. They would jump to random coordinates in unexplored space, discover something valuable, and return as wealthy pioneers. The fact that this strategy had bankrupted hundreds of explorers before them did not seem to register as relevant information. Creditors were closing in. The authorities had begun inquiring about unpaid docking fees. Gav convinced his sister that they had no choice. One desperate jump into the unknown or face debtor's prison. Jory, who prided herself on being the more cautious of the two, found herself agreeing because sometimes the illusion of action feels better than the certainty of consequences. They jumped. The coordinates were generated essentially at random, pointing toward a region of space so far beyond Republic charts that no one had ever bothered to name the stars there. Hyperspace travel normally took days or weeks. This journey took months. Their supplies dwindled. Their ship's systems began failing. By the time they finally emerged, both siblings were half convinced they would die in the void between destinations. Instead, they arrived at Korriban during the exact moment of Naga Sadow's funeral duel with Ludo Kresh. Their senses immediately registered the impossible. A massive civilization existed here, completely unknown to the Republic. Cities, fleets, energy signatures indicating technology as advanced as anything Coruscant possessed. How had an entire empire remained hidden for so long? They had seconds to process this information before Sith warships surrounded them. The Starbreaker 12, already failing after its extended journey, stood no chance of escape. Tractor beams locked onto their hull, a voice speaking accented but comprehensible. Basic demanded their immediate surrender. Gav and Jory, exhausted and overwhelmed, complied. They were brought to Korriban in chains, dragged before the Sith Council during one of the most volatile moments in recent Empire history. The timing could not have been worse, or, depending on perspective, better. The Sith Lords were already divided over succession. Half supported Krash's cautious approach, half backed Sadow's aggressive vision. This stalemate had paralyzed decision-making for days. Then these Republic explorers literally fell from the sky. The initial debate was straightforward. Execute the intruders and maintain the Empire's secrecy, or study them to learn more about current Republic capabilities. Ludo Kresh argued for immediate execution. These humans represented an unacceptable risk. If they somehow escaped or if others came looking for them, the Empire's location would be compromised. 2,000 years of careful isolation would be destroyed by two incompetent explorers. Naga Sadow saw something entirely different. He saw opportunity crystallized into physical form. While the Council debated, Sadow had been thinking, planning. These explorers had not come deliberately. They were fugitives fleeing debt, desperate enough to jump blindly into unknown space. No one was coming to rescue them. No one even knew they were here. But what if the Sith could make it appear that the Republic had sent scouts? What if attacks on Sith holdings could be blamed on Republic infiltrators? Fear had always been the most effective tool for consolidating power. Give the Sith Empire an external enemy and internal divisions would evaporate. The Council would have to choose a strong leader to coordinate defense. And who better than the visionary who had warned them about Republic aggression? Sadow began his manipulation immediately. While Gav and Jory sat imprisoned, confused and terrified, Sith forces under Sadow's secret command attacked remote outposts. Warships were sabotaged in dock. Supply depots exploded. Each incident was attributed to Republic spies, to an invasion force that had somehow infiltrated Sith space. The evidence was circumstantial but consistent, and fear does not require proof, only suggestion. Ludo Kresh suspected what Sadow was doing but could not prove it. Accusations without evidence would make him appear paranoid and weak. He watched helplessly as the Council's mood shifted from debate to alarm. Sith Lords who had supported his cautious approach began demanding action. The Republic had found them. War was inevitable. Better to strike first than wait for the enemy to choose the moment of battle. Naga Sadow was proclaimed Dark Lord of the Sith. His first command was to begin total mobilization. Every shipyard went to maximum production. Every forge worked day and night creating weapons and armor. The Massassi breeding programs, which had been producing warriors at a steady pace, were accelerated to emergency levels. Sith alchemists worked themselves to exhaustion creating war beasts and enhanced soldiers. Gav Daragan, desperate to survive and too naive to understand what he was witnessing, accepted Sadow's offer of apprenticeship. The Dark Lord taught him basic Sith techniques, gave him command of a small fleet, made him feel important and valued. Gav convinced himself he had found his true calling. He had always felt the Jedi were too restrictive, too bound by rules that prevented real achievement. The Sith offered him the freedom and power he had always deserved. Jory saw through Sadow's manipulation, but found herself powerless to stop it. She was imprisoned in a cell designed to hold Force users, neutralizing any natural sensitivity she might possess. Guards watched her constantly. Escape seemed impossible until the night Sadow himself arrived and unlocked her door. He gave her back the Starbreaker 12, repaired and refueled. He even provided her with charts to find her way back to Republic space. His generosity seemed incomprehensible until she realized the truth. He wanted her to escape. He wanted her to warn the Republic, because a forewarned enemy who still gets defeated looks weak and foolish, and Sadow needed the Republic to appear vulnerable to justify his coming conquest. Jory fled, jumping to hyperspace the moment she cleared Korriban's gravity well. She would spend months traveling back to known space, all while the Sith Armada prepared for war, and unknown to her, Sadow had attached a tracking device to her ship's hull. When she reached the Republic, he would know exactly where to strike. The Armada that assembled in orbit above Korriban dwarfed anything the Sith Empire had ever created. Hundreds of capital ships, each one bristling with weapons, thousands of fighters, tens of thousands of Massassi warriors eager for combat, war beasts loaded into transport ships, creatures bred specifically to spread terror, to break enemy formations through sheer horrifying presence. At the fleet's heart sat Naga Sadow's meditation sphere, a unique vessel designed to channel his force abilities across impossible distances. Through this ship, he could coordinate attacks on multiple worlds simultaneously. He could create illusions that multiplied his forces, making 10 ships appear as 100. He could reach into the minds of enemy commanders and fill them with fear and confusion. Ludo Crash made one final attempt to stop the madness. He challenged Sadow openly before the assembled fleet, accusing him of manufacturing the crisis, of lying to achieve power, of leading the Empire toward destruction. The speech was eloquent and passionate and completely ineffective. The Sith Lords had committed to war. Retreat now would mean admitting they had been manipulated, and pride matters more than truth when your entire culture is built on strength. Sadow's response was to attack Kresh's ship directly, using the full power of his meditation sphere to strike at his rival. The battle was brief and decisive. Kresh's vessel was crippled, forced to limp back towards Sith space in disgrace. The message was clear. Any who opposed the Dark Lord would be destroyed as enemies of the Empire itself. Meanwhile, Jory Daragan finally reached Koros Major. She burst into the throne room of Empress Teta, shouting warnings about the Sith Empire, about the massive fleet preparing to invade, about her brother who had been turned into a puppet of their Dark Lord. The Empress listened with growing alarm. The Jedi Council dispatched investigators. Republic military intelligence began analyzing what little information Jory could provide. But they were far too late. Naga Sadow's tracking device had already revealed the route back to Republic space. The Armada entered hyperspace, traveling along the path Jory had unwittingly provided. They would strike 7 worlds simultaneously, overwhelming Republic defenses through surprise and superior coordination. The Great Hyperspace War had begun, and for the first year, the Sith would appear unstoppable. The Sith Armada emerged from hyperspace across 7 Republic worlds on the same day at the same hour. The coordination alone was unprecedented. Most military forces struggled to coordinate attacks across a single system. Sadow was conducting a symphony of destruction across dozens of light years, using his meditation sphere to link every fleet commander directly to his will. Coruscant, the Republic capital, was struck first. Sith warships appeared in orbit without warning, bypassing the outer defense stations through routes that should not have existed. Republic intelligence would later discover that Sadow had been sending scouts through hyperspace for months, mapping every approach, identifying every weakness. The attack was not improvised, it was surgical. Exar Kun, one of Sadow's most capable commanders, led the assault on Coruscant. His orders were explicit: capture the Senate building, break the Republic government's ability to coordinate resistance, make the rest of the galaxy watch as their supposed protectors fell before Sith might. Victory here would shatter morale across every loyal system. Massive dropships descended through Coruscant's atmosphere, burning like meteors. They landed in the Senate district, disgorging Massassi warriors by the hundreds. These were not ordinary soldiers. They had been bred and trained for exactly this purpose, enhanced through Sith alchemy, until they stood nearly twice the height of a normal human, their strength augmented beyond natural limits. Alongside them came the war beasts, Tukata, creatures that resembled canines only in the way that nightmares resemble dreams. They moved on 4 legs but could rear up to strike with claws that could shred durasteel. Their hides were thick enough to deflect blaster bolts. Worst of all, they could sense Force users, hunting Jedi specifically with terrifying efficiency. Republic soldiers mobilized as quickly as possible but found themselves facing enemies they had never trained to fight. Standard tactics failed. Blasters that should have dropped attackers merely slowed them. Defensive positions that should have held for hours collapsed in minutes. The Massassi warriors fought with complete disregard for their own survival, throwing themselves at Republic lines in waves that eventually overwhelmed through pure relentless pressure. 4 Jedi Masters formed the core of Coruscant's defense. Mehmet Nadil, a tactician who had spent decades studying ancient battles, organized the resistance on the Senate steps. He positioned his fellow Jedi to maximize their defensive capabilities, while Republic soldiers fired from elevated positions. It should have been enough. The mathematics of the battlefield suggested they could hold until reinforcements arrived. Then Naga Sadow's illusions took effect. Suddenly, instead of hundreds of Massassi warriors, there appeared to be thousands. The battlefield seemed to writhe with enemies, each one as real as the others, to every sense including Force perception. Jedi found themselves striking at phantoms, while real threats attacked from unexpected angles. Republic soldiers wasted ammunition on illusions, while actual enemies closed the distance unmolested. The Senate building nearly fell in those first hours. Only Mehmet Nadil's desperate gambit saved it. He reached out through the Force, not to attack, but to sense. Illusions, no matter how perfect, lacked the essential spark of life. They moved, but did not truly exist. By focusing on presence rather than appearance, he could distinguish real from false. Once he understood the trick, he could teach others. Jedi across the battlefield began ignoring their eyes and trusting the Force. The tide slowly turned. Republic soldiers, guided by Jedi who could see through the deception, concentrated their fire on real targets. The Massassi advance stalled, then stopped, then began retreating toward their dropships. Exar Kun, watching from orbit, realized the illusion had been pierced. Without that advantage, his forces lacked the numbers to achieve their objective. But Coruscant was only one battlefield among 7. On Coruscant, Gav Daragon led the assault against his own homeworld. He piloted his fleet into orbit above the planet where he had been born, where he had dreamed childish dreams of glory, where he had fled in shame to avoid debtor's prison. Now he returned as a conqueror, commanding Sith forces, wielding powers that made him feel like a god. Empress Teta, who had listened to Jory's warnings, was as prepared as anyone could be for the impossible. Her fleets were mobilized. Planetary shields were raised. Jedi reinforcements had arrived to coordinate defense. When Gav's forces attacked, they met organized resistance rather than the chaos they had expected. The battle for Koros Major became personal in ways military historians still debate. Gav was attacking his home, his family, his sister, who watched from the surface. Part of him still believed he was doing the right thing. The Sith offered freedom from arbitrary rules. They promised a galaxy where strength determined status rather than accident of birth. Surely his sister would understand once the Republic fell, and the New Order proved superior. Jory saw only her brother's betrayal, saw him commanding the forces that killed people they had known since childhood, saw him unleashing horrors bred in Sith laboratories to terrorize civilians who had never harmed anyone. The brother she remembered, foolish and reckless but fundamentally decent, seemed completely gone. In his place was something wearing his face and speaking with his voice, but utterly transformed. The turning point came during ground combat in the city of Sinagar. Gav landed his personal transport, intending to find Jory and convince her to join him. Instead, he encountered Araba the Hutt, an old friend who had often helped the Daragon siblings when they were young. Araba tried to reason with Gav, tried to remind him of who he had been before Sadow's corruption. The Massassi guards, programmed to eliminate any threat to their commander, killed Arba before Gav could stop them. One moment the old Hutt was speaking, appealing to memories of better times. The next moment he was dead, body torn apart by warriors who knew only obedience and violence. Jory arrived seconds later. She saw an Araba's corpse. She saw her brother standing over it, Massassi guards surrounding him. She saw in that moment the complete truth of what Gav had become, not a glorious warrior fighting for a better future. A puppet dancing on strings held by a Sith Lord who cared nothing for him beyond his utility. Her rage was absolute and purifying. She ignited a lightsaber, taken from a fallen Jedi, and cut down the remaining Massassi guard. Then she confronted Gav directly, demanding to know if any part of her real brother still existed, or if Sadow had consumed him completely. Gav could not answer, could not justify, could not even meet her eyes. For the first time since accepting Sadow's teachings, he felt something other than confidence and power. He felt shame. The emotion was so foreign after months of Sith conditioning that it paralyzed him. He fled, abandoned the battlefield, returned to his ship, and jumped to hyperspace without coordinating with the rest of the Sith forces. His absence created immediate chaos in the command structure. Ships that had been following his orders suddenly found themselves leaderless. The attack on Koros Major collapsed within hours. Similar patterns emerged across the other 5 battlefields. Initial Sith advantages gave way to organized Republic resistance. The element of surprise, so devastating in the first hours, could only be used once. Republic forces adapted. Jedi learned to counter Sith techniques. Soldiers developed tactics for fighting enhanced warriors and war beasts. Most critically, the Republic began coordinating their defense. Fleets that had been scattered across the galaxy consolidated, choosing to defend key worlds rather than spreading themselves thin. Supply lines stabilized. Reinforcements arrived from sectors initially untouched by the invasion. The Republic's vast resources, seemingly limitless population, and centuries of peaceful development became assets that numbers alone could not overcome. Naga Sadow, watching the war's progress from his meditation sphere, realized his grand invasion was failing, not catastrophically. His forces had won victories. They held territory on multiple worlds. But the decisive breakthrough he had promised, the shattering of Republic morale that would lead to total collapse, had not materialized. Worse, Reports reached him from Sith space. Ludo Kresh, humiliated but not destroyed, had returned to Korriban. He was rallying the Sith Lords who had always doubted Sadow's aggressive vision. A message arrived, transmitted on frequencies only Sith vessels could receive. Kresh had declared Sadow a false Dark Lord and was preparing to attack his forces. The war Sadow had started to unite. The Sith Empire was instead tearing it apart. He now faced enemies on two fronts, with diminishing resources and growing casualties. The moment of decision approached rapidly: retreat and face Kresh's challenge, or continue the invasion and risk having his forces trapped between Republic fleets and Sith rivals. Sadow chose retreat, but not before sending one final command to all his forces: pull back to rally point in Primus Gold system. Regroup. Prepare for battle against both Republic and Sith enemies. He would salvage what he could from this failed invasion and then settle matters with Kryse permanently. The war's first phase ended. Republic worlds celebrated premature victory. Jedi mourned their fallen. Empress Teta prepared to pursue the retreating Sith, and Gav Daragon, racked by guilt and horror, decided the only way to atone was to betray the Dark Lord who had corrupted him. The bloodiest chapter was yet to come. Naga Sadow retreated towards Sith space with the remnants of his invasion force. Dozens of ships had been destroyed. Thousands of Massassi warriors were dead or captured. His meditation sphere had sustained damage from a Republic attack, limiting his ability to coordinate across vast distances. Every strategic advantage he had possessed at the war's beginning was gone, stripped away by Republic adaptation and Sith internal betrayal. But Ludo Kresh had not remained idle. During Sadow's disastrous invasion, Kresh had convinced the Sith Council that the entire enterprise was built on lies. He presented evidence of Sadow's manipulations, showed how the supposed Republic infiltration had been staged. Most importantly, he appealed to the fear now gripping every Sith Lord. If Sadow's invasion had revealed their location to the Republic, if massive fleets were coming to destroy their empire, then the conservative approach had been correct all along. The Council named Kresh the true Dark Lord. His first command was to assemble the Sith home fleet and intercept Sadow before he could return to Korriban. The message was clear: Sadow would answer for his crimes or die trying to resist judgment. The two forces met in orbit above Korriban, the sacred world that had birthed their empire now bearing witness to its fracture. Sith fought Sith, while Republic fleets, pursuing Sadow, approached rapidly. It was the nightmare scenario that millennia of careful unity had been designed to prevent: internal division while external enemies advanced. The battle was vicious and brief. Kresh commanded fresher forces, ships that had not endured months of combat. Sadow's vessels were damaged, crews exhausted, resources depleted. Under any normal circumstances, the outcome would have been inevitable. But Naga Sadow had not survived this long by accepting normal circumstances. He channeled every remaining ounce of power through his meditation sphere, reaching out to touch the minds of Kresh's warriors. Not to control them directly, which would have been impossible across so many individuals. Instead, he planted doubt, whispered suggestions. Perhaps Kresh had made a deal with the Republic. Perhaps this attack was coordinated with incoming Republic fleets. Perhaps they were being manipulated into destroying each other while their real enemies watched and prepared to finish the survivors. The doubt spread like poison through Kryse's forces. Ship captains hesitated. Coordination faltered. In that moment of uncertainty, Sadow struck with everything remaining to him. He sacrificed his own damaged vessels, ramming them into Kryse's capital ships, destroying both in massive explosions that lit the void like temporary stars. Ludo Kresh's flagship took the full impact of a cruiser traveling at ramming speed. The explosion tore through shields and hull, atmosphere venting explosively, power cores detonating in sequence. Kresh himself died in the conflagration, his body atomized before he could even comprehend his defeat. The remaining Sith forces scattered, without their leader, without clear orders. Each captain made individual decisions to flee or surrender or continue fighting. The unity that might have defeated Sadow dissolved into chaos. And while they fought amongst themselves, Republic fleets arrived in the system. Empress Teta commanded the pursuit forces personally. She had witnessed Sith atrocities on her homeworld. She had seen their war beasts tear through civilian populations. She understood that allowing Sadow to escape would mean this nightmare could return in a generation or a century. The Sith had to be destroyed completely, their ability to wage war eliminated forever. Her forces outnumbered what remained of Sadow's fleet by perhaps 10 to 1. The battle should have ended in minutes. But Naga Sadow had one final card to play. He had studied ancient Sith techniques that even most Sith lords considered too dangerous to attempt. His meditation sphere was damaged but still functional, and nearby, purely by chance, or perhaps by the Force's dark humor, was a binary star system called Denari Nova. Sadow fled toward those twin stars with the Republic fleet in pursuit. He maneuvered between the massive stellar bodies, using their gravity wells to slingshot his damaged sphere along an escape trajectory. Republic ships followed, tightening the noose, preparing for final kill shots that would end the war decisively. Then Naga Sadow reached out through the Force toward the stars themselves, not to touch their surface, which would have been impossible even for him, but to find the currents of energy already flowing beneath their surfaces, the magnetic loops and plasma arcs that danced constantly between the binary pair. He found them, and he pushed. The technique required everything he possessed. His body aged visibly as power poured out of him. His skin withered, his eyes burned in their sockets. Around him, his meditation sphere's systems began failing, unable to handle the energies being channeled through its machinery. But he maintained focus, directing the power, guiding it, transforming natural stellar phenomena into directed catastrophe. The solar flares erupted simultaneously from both stars, reaching toward each other like hands clapping to crush everything between them. The Republic ships, caught in the middle, had seconds to react. Some managed to jump to hyperspace. Others turned away at maximum acceleration, desperate to escape the walls of plasma approaching from both directions. Most were not fast enough. The flares met in the middle, releasing energy equivalent to multiple supernovas. Ships dissolved instantly, their shields meaningless against such overwhelming force. The Denari system died. Any planets that had orbited those stars ceased to exist. The stars themselves began the process of collapse that would eventually transform them into neutron stars or black holes. Naga Sadow's meditation sphere, positioned at the edge of the blast radius, was caught by the shockwave and hurled into hyperspace along a random vector. He had no control over his destination. He was barely conscious, his body damaged nearly beyond survival. His crew was dead, killed by the feedback from channeling such immense power, but he was alive, and he had escaped. The Republic fleet pulled back, stunned by what they had witnessed. Billions had died. In an instant, an entire star system had been obliterated. The Sith were capable of atrocities beyond anything previously imagined. Empress Teta made the decision to end pursuit and instead secure the Sith territory they had already captured. Korriban and the surrounding systems would be occupied, their shipyards destroyed, their academy closed. The Sith Empire would be dismantled so thoroughly that it could never threaten the galaxy again. Naga Sadow's sphere emerged from hyperspace in a remote system so far from any traveled route that it appeared on no charts. The fourth moon of a gas giant, covered in dense jungle, Yavin 4. He crashed there, his sphere's systems completely dead, his body sustained only by the dark side energies he had absorbed during the stellar manipulation. He crawled from the wreckage, found the handful of Massassi warriors who had survived the crash, and used the last of his strength to bind them to his will permanently. They would build a temple to house his body. They would worship him as a god, and he would sleep here, his consciousness preserved in Sith stasis, waiting for the day when perhaps someone worthy would find him and learn from his triumphs and his failures. The Great Hyperspace War was over. The Republic had won. The Sith Empire was shattered. And in the unknown regions on Dromund Kaas and other hidden worlds, the surviving Sith went deep into hiding, nursing their hatred, planning their eventual return. The war had lasted only a single year, but its consequences would shape the next 5,000. The galaxy exhaled. For the first time in living memory, the Sith were gone. Republic forces occupied Korriban, walking through the Valley of the Dark Lords with a mixture of awe and revulsion. The tombs stood empty, their traps triggered and disabled, their holocrons confiscated by Jedi Archivists who sealed them away in the deepest vaults. The Sith Academy was dismantled stone by stone. Every text, every artifact, every tool of their dark philosophy was catalogued and either destroyed or locked away where it could never again corrupt the curious. Empress Teta stood on the steps of what had been the greatest Sith temple and declared the threat eliminated. The Jedi Council, more cautious, warned that darkness was not so easily extinguished, but even they believed the organized threat was ended. Individual dark-siders might arise, as they always had throughout history, but the Sith Empire, that concentrated manifestation of galactic evil, was finished. They were wrong. On Dromund Kaas, beyond the edge of any Republic star chart, the true Sith Empire endured. These were Sith who had never followed Naga Sadow, who had considered his invasion premature and reckless. They had maintained hidden colonies, secret shipyards, entire civilizations built in the unknown reaches where Republic scouts never ventured. When news of Sadow's defeat reached them, they did not despair. They learned. The true Sith went deeper underground. They erased every trace that might lead Republic explorers to their location. They developed new hyperspace routes that approached their territory through regions so navigationally hazardous that only someone with exact coordinates could survive the journey. And they began the long, patient work of rebuilding what Sadow's arrogance had nearly destroyed. At the center of this hidden empire sat a being so powerful that describing him as merely a Sith Lord seemed inadequate. The Sith Emperor, whose original name had been forgotten even by himself, had discovered techniques that defied comprehension. He had learned to consume entire planets, draining the life force from every living thing, channeling that stolen vitality to extend his own existence indefinitely. He had performed this ritual once, transforming a thriving world into a lifeless husk, and in the process had achieved something approaching immortality. But immortality came with a price. His body barely functioned. His mind existed in multiple states simultaneously. He required constant meditation to maintain coherence, surrounded by attendants who existed only to anchor his consciousness to physical reality. Yet despite these limitations, his power dwarfed anything the fallen Jedi who founded the original Sith Empire could have imagined. Under his guidance, the true Sith Empire rebuilt with purpose rather than passion. They studied Naga Sadow's mistakes exhaustively. The archives on Dromund Kaas contained every report, every tactical analysis, every strategic assessment of the failed invasion. The pattern was clear. The Sith had revealed themselves too early, attacked too aggressively, and most fatally, allowed internal division to compromise external conquest. The solution was discipline. The true Sith would not repeat these errors. They would build their strength over centuries if necessary. They would maintain absolute unity, enforced by the Emperor's overwhelming presence. And when they finally struck, It would not be a tentative probe, but a hammer blow that would shatter the Republic before it could organize meaningful resistance. But while the true Sith planned in secret, the Republic faced more immediate threats. One arose from within the Jedi Order itself, from a place of genuine noble intent that somehow twisted into catastrophe. His name was Freedon Nad, and his fall would shape the next 1,000 years of galactic history. Freedon Nad had been a brilliant Jedi student 400 years after the Great Hyperspace War. He studied on Ossus, excelling in every discipline, mastering techniques that took others decades to learn. His teachers praised his dedication. His fellow students admired his skill. Everyone agreed that Freedon Nad would one day rank among the greatest Jedi of his generation. But he wanted more than greatness. He wanted acknowledgement. When the Council delayed his promotion to Knight, citing his need for additional meditation on humility and patience, Nad felt the slight as a physical wound. He had proven himself superior to every measure they set. He had demonstrated mastery beyond question, yet they withheld the rank he deserved because of subjective concerns about his attitude. The injustice burned, and in burning, it opened him to questions he had previously dismissed as irrelevant. Why did the Jedi fear emotion when emotion provided such clarity? Why did they restrict techniques that could help so many people? Why did they cling to ancient traditions instead of embracing progress? These questions led him to the restricted archives, to texts that had been sealed after the Great Hyperspace War. He convinced an archivist that his research was sanctioned, a lie that came surprisingly easily once he allowed himself to speak it. The holocrons he accessed contained knowledge the Jedi had deemed too dangerous: Sith techniques, dark side philosophies, and one artifact that would determine his fate. King Ardus had been a Sith ruler millennia before the fallen Jedi ever reached Coruscant. His holocron contained wisdom accumulated over a lifetime of dark side mastery. When Nad activated it, the gatekeeper that appeared was ancient beyond measure, its understanding of the Force profound in ways that Jedi teaching seemed juvenile by comparison. It offered to show Nad what true power looked like, show him how to achieve everything he deserved. Nad accepted, and in accepting, began a journey that would take him far from Ossus, far from the Jedi, far from anything he had been. The holocron directed him to Yavin 4, to the tomb where Naga Sadow slept in Sith stasis. The ancient Dark Lord's spirit still lingered, trapped but conscious, desperate for a student who could carry his legacy forward. The education Nad received in that jungle temple lasted years. Sadow taught him every technique he had mastered during his long life. Force lightning that could shatter stone, illusions that could deceive entire armies, Sith alchemy that could reshape living flesh, battle meditation that could turn the tide of wars, and most importantly, the philosophy that justified using these powers without restraint or regret. When Nad finally emerged from the temple, he was no longer a disappointed Jedi student. He was a Dark Lord of the Sith, the first to claim that title since the Great Hyperspace War's end. His power had grown beyond anything he had imagined possible. His connection to the Force ran deeper than any Jedi could achieve through their limited, fearful approach. He returned to Sadow's tomb one final time. The ancient spirit appeared, expecting gratitude and continued servitude. Instead, Nad attacked, channeling everything Sadow had taught him, using the Master's own techniques against him. The battle lasted seconds. When it ended, Naga Sadow's spirit was destroyed utterly, denied even the ghost of existence. Nad stood alone in the tomb, Dark Lord of the Sith with no empire to rule, no army to command, no clear enemy to fight. So he chose a different path. He traveled to Onderon, a remote jungle world where a primitive monarchy ruled from a single fortified city. Using his powers, he conquered the planet in months, installing himself as king. The people worshipped him as something beyond mortal, and perhaps he was. For decades, Freedon Nad ruled Onderon with absolute authority. He conducted experiments in Sith alchemy, creating the beasts that would plague the planet for generations. He manipulated the political structure to ensure his bloodline would inherit power. He wrote texts preserving his knowledge, ensuring that even if his body failed, his teachings would survive. When death finally claimed him, as it claims all things, his spirit refused to depart. He bound himself to his tomb beneath the city of Aziz, just as Sadow had done before him. From there he influenced his descendants, teaching them dark techniques in dreams and visions, ensuring that the Sith philosophy would persist through his royal bloodline. The Jedi eventually discovered what had happened on Onderon. They fought to free the planet from Nad's influence, succeeding only partially. They buried his physical remains on the moon Dexon, hoping that distance from civilization would weaken his spirit's ability to corrupt the living. But spirits that refuse to die are not so easily contained. 400 years after Freedom Nad's fall, the galaxy remained at peace. The Republic had expanded, the Jedi Order had grown. New generations who had never witnessed war convinced themselves that darkness was ancient history. They studied the Sith as archaeologists study extinct civilizations, with academic interest rather than visceral fear. This complacency created the perfect environment for the next catastrophe. Because on Dantooine, at a Jedi Academy far from Coruscant's politics and oversight, a brilliant young student named Exar Kun was beginning to ask the same questions that had doomed Freedom Nad. And like Nad before him, Kun would find that the Sith had left answers scattered across the galaxy, waiting patiently for someone arrogant enough to believe they could control what they learned. The pattern was establishing itself. Every few centuries, a Jedi would fall, not through external corruption, but through internal weakness masked as strength, pride disguised as confidence, ambition presented as dedication. The Sith did not need to actively recruit. They simply needed to leave knowledge where the ambitious would find it. Human nature, or rather sentient nature, would handle the rest. The Jedi Council studied these falls, tried to understand how to prevent them. They created additional restrictions, more rules, stricter oversight. But each new restriction made the forbidden seem more attractive to those who chafed against limitations. Every Padawan who felt undervalued, every knight who believed themselves wiser than their masters, every scholar who thought understanding darkness required embracing it, all of them became potential doorways through which the Sith could return. And far away on Drummond Caius, the true Sith Empire watched and waited. They had learned patience from hard experience. They had learned planning from catastrophic failure. They had learned that revealing themselves too soon meant defeat, so they remained hidden, building their strength, refining their strategy, preparing for the moment when the galaxy had forgotten to fear them. That moment was approaching. Within a few centuries, the true Sith would emerge from hiding. But before that revelation, one more Jedi would fall spectacularly. One more Dark Lord would rise to shake the galaxy. One more lesson would be taught about the cost of arrogance. His name was Exar Kun, and his story would become a warning that the Jedi still reference 4,000 years later when teaching students about the seduction of the dark side. 3,997 years before the Battle of Yavin, a young man stood in the Jedi Archives on Dantooine, reading texts that most students never bothered to access. His name was Exar Kun, and he possessed the kind of intelligence that can become its own prison. He learned faster than his teachers could instruct. He mastered techniques after observing them once. He understood force theory with intuitive clarity that took others years of meditation to achieve. His master, Vodosiask Baines, recognized the danger immediately. The Krivaki Jedi had trained many students over his long life, and he understood that exceptional ability often correlated with exceptional pride. Kun excelled at everything, which meant he had never truly failed at anything. He had never faced a challenge that forced him to accept his limitations, and beings who never learn their limitations eventually discover them in the worst possible way. Vodo tried to teach humility through gentle guidance. He assigned Kun tasks that required patience rather than brilliance. He emphasized meditation over action, reflection over achievement. But every lesson seemed to bounce off the young man's certainty that he already understood everything worth understanding. When Vodo suggested that Kun might benefit from studying the agricultural core for a year, learning the value of simple work and connection to living things, Kun laughed. The archives on Dantooine contained references to the ancient Sith, not the sanitized versions taught to younglings, but the actual historical records, preserved because forgetting the past guaranteed repeating it. Kun devoured these texts with growing fascination. Here were Force users who achieved powers the modern Jedi claimed were impossible. They commanded lightning, they created life, they conquered planets through will alone. The Jedi explanation for why such techniques were forbidden struck Kun as obviously self-serving. They claimed the dark side corrupted anyone who used it. That power gained through emotion inevitably led to destruction and suffering. But Kun saw another possibility. Perhaps the ancient Jedi had simply been weak. Perhaps they had lacked the discipline and intelligence to wield such power responsibly. Perhaps someone sufficiently skilled could use these techniques without succumbing to corruption. He became obsessed with proving this hypothesis. Late at night, when other students slept, Kun practiced techniques described in the forbidden texts. Small things at first, channeling anger to enhance his strength, using fear to sharpen his reflexes. Nothing that seemed particularly dangerous or evil, just emotion applied to practical purpose. The results were immediate and intoxicating. He could move faster, hit harder, perceive more clearly when he allowed emotion to fuel his connection to the Force. The Jedi Code insisted that peace provided power, but Kun's experience suggested the opposite. Passion provided power. Peace was just another word for limitation. Vodo Siosk-Ba sensed the darkness growing in his student, but faced the teacher's eternal dilemma. Confront too early, and you push the student away. Confront too late, and the corruption becomes irreversible. He chose to wait, to gather evidence, to be certain before making accusations that could not be retracted. This caution, this very wisdom that made Vodo a great Jedi, would prove fatal. Yin's research led him inevitably to references about Freeden Nad. The texts described Nad's fall, his conquest of Onderon, his influence that persisted even after death. Most students would have read these passages as cautionary tales. Yin's read them as proof of concept. If Nad could achieve such power, could maintain influence for centuries after his physical death, then clearly the dark side was not the trap the Jedi claimed. It was simply a tool that required sufficient intelligence to wield properly. He left Dantooine without permission, stealing a ship in the night and setting course for Onderon. The journey took weeks, and during those weeks, Kun convinced himself repeatedly that he was not falling to the dark side. He was investigating it, studying it, understanding it. These were all activities a responsible Jedi should undertake. How could the Order protect the galaxy from darkness if they refused to understand how it functioned? Onderon had changed in the 4 centuries since Nad's death, but not improved. The planet remained locked in perpetual conflict between the walled city of Aziz and the beast riders who roamed the jungles. Both sides claimed Nad's legacy, both insisted they understood his true teachings. The result was endless war that accomplished nothing except providing steady casualties. Kun arrived claiming to be a Jedi mediator, sent to help resolve the conflict. The lie came easily, and its ease should have warned him how far he had already fallen. Instead, he felt proud of his tactical thinking, pleased at his ability to manipulate others toward his larger goal of acquiring knowledge. He made contact with Satel and Alima Keto, cousins who had founded something they called the Krath. These were aristocrats who had discovered some of Freeden Nad's writings and decided that dark side philosophy represented the ultimate sophistication. They dressed in elaborate robes, performed dramatic rituals, and convinced themselves they were wielding ancient power when mostly they were playing at darkness without understanding its real cost. But they knew where Nad was buried. They had made pilgrimages to his tomb on Dacian, and they were foolish enough to believe they could control a Jedi who came seeking forbidden knowledge. Alima in particular saw Kun as a potential tool. She would seduce him, bind him to the Krath, use his genuine Force abilities to enhance their political power. Her plans demonstrated ambition, but not intelligence. The tomb of Freeden Nad sat in the jungle moon's deepest valley, surrounded by the descendants of creatures Nad had created through Sith alchemy. Getting there required navigating terrain that killed most who attempted it. The Ketos brought Kun to the tomb's entrance, and then, in a moment of spectacular stupidity, triggered a collapse that sealed him inside. They believed this would force him to embrace the dark side to survive, binding him to them through shared corruption. They had no idea what they had unleashed. Inside that tomb, buried beneath tons of stone, with air running out and darkness pressing in from every direction, Exar Kun faced the first genuine crisis of his life. He could not think his way out. He could not learn a technique fast enough to matter. His intelligence, his skill, his confidence meant nothing against simple physics and approaching death. Freeden Nad's spirit appeared in that moment of desperation. The ancient Dark Lord had waited centuries for someone with Kun's potential. He offered salvation in exchange for submission. Serve the Sith and live, refuse and die forgotten beneath uncaring stone. Kun's decision took seconds. He had not come this far to die stupidly in a collapsed tomb. He accepted Nad's offer, felt dark side energy pour into him, healing his injuries and giving him strength beyond anything he had previously accessed. The stones that had trapped him seemed suddenly light as air. He lifted them through the Force and walked free, reborn as something more and less than what he had been. But Exar Kun had not survived through intelligence by accident. He listened to Nad's teachings, learned what the ancient spirit knew, and then analyzed the relationship with cold clarity. Nad wanted a puppet, a physical body through which to act, a student who would serve without question, and that was precisely what Kun refused to become. Nad directed him to Coruscant, to the tombs of the ancient Dark Lords, where true Sith knowledge waited. Kun went, but not as obedient student. He went as researcher, archaeologist, seeker of power that he would control rather than allowing it to control him. This distinction mattered enormously to Kun even as it became increasingly irrelevant to reality. The Valley of the Dark Lord sprawled before him, tombs rising like broken teeth from red sand. 900 years had passed since Republic forces occupied this world. Nature and time had softened some edges, but the essential character remained. This was a place built to inspire dread and demand submission. Every structure designed to make visitors feel small and temporary. Kun entered the tomb of Naga Sadow, following passages that descended deep into Coruscant's crust. The deeper he went, the stronger the dark side presence became, not hostile. Exactly, more like recognition. The darkness acknowledged him as something similar to itself. He found holocrons that Jedi Archivists had missed, hidden behind traps that killed the insufficiently skilled. He learned techniques that made Freeden Nad's teaching seem like basic training. Most significantly, he found Naga Sadow's meditation sphere, damaged but repairable. This was the ship through which Sadow had coordinated attacks across 7 worlds simultaneously. With this, Kun could project his will across vast distances. With this, he could become something no single Jedi should be able to become. He could become an army. When Kun left Coruscant, he carried knowledge that represented 3,000 years of accumulated Sith wisdom. and he had a plan. The Jedi Order restricted its members through fear and outdated tradition. But what if someone offered them liberation? What if a Jedi, recognized and respected, showed them how much more they could achieve? He would build a new Sith Empire. Not like the ancient version built on a single species and isolated world. This would be a brotherhood of freed Jedi, each one having chosen power and wisdom over restriction and stagnation. Together they would remake the galaxy into something better than the stagnant Republic could ever maintain. The fact that this vision exactly paralleled every previous Sith Lord's justification occurred to Kun only as a distant observation, easily dismissed. He was different, he was smarter, he understood what the others had missed. His arrogance had become so complete that it was invisible to him, like air to someone who had never known vacuum. Freedom Nad's spirit appeared one final time, attempting to assert control, to bend Kun to his will as he had bent so many before. Kun destroyed him with barely any effort, using techniques learned from Sadow's holocrons. The ancient Dark Lord's surprise was almost comical. He had created this monster, fed it knowledge, showed it power, and like every master throughout Sith history, he learned too late that creating something stronger than yourself means you will eventually be destroyed by it. Tum set course for Yavin 4. If he was building an empire, he needed a base, and the ancient Massassi temples waiting in the jungle would serve perfectly. While Exar Kun prepared his base on Yavin 4, using Sith alchemy to enslave the Massassi descendants and force them to construct ever larger temples, another Jedi was beginning his own descent into darkness through an entirely different path. Ulic Qel-Droma had everything Kun lacked. Where Kun was arrogant, Ulic was noble. Where Kun sought power, Ulic sought justice. Where Kun fell through pride, Ulic would fall through love and the desperate desire to protect it. Ulic served on Coruscant under Master Arca Jeth, one of the most respected Jedi of the era. Together they had resolved conflicts across dozens of systems, using negotiation and wisdom rather than force. Ulic believed absolutely in the Jedi path, in the power of compassion and patience to overcome any obstacle. His faith was complete and untested, which made it fundamentally fragile. The Kryth, led by Satel and Alima Keto, after their manipulation of Exar Kun failed to bind him, had launched a coup in the Empress Teta system. Using dark side techniques learned from Freedom Nad's writings, they had murdered their parents, seized control of the government, and begun converting the system into a dark side stronghold. When the Jedi came to investigate, the Kryth ambushed them. Master Arca Jeth was killed, struck down by Alima's Sith sorcery. Ulic watched his master die, felt him become one with the Force. The man who had taught him everything, who had shown him what a Jedi could be, was gone, and his killers celebrated, drunk on their newfound power, treating Arca's death as proof of the superiority of their dark philosophy. Rage filled Ulic in that moment. Pure, absolute rage that demanded outlet and satisfaction. He wanted to attack, to destroy, to make them pay for what they had taken. But he was surrounded, outnumbered, facing enemies who had demonstrated willingness to kill Jedi without hesitation. Discretion demanded retreat. So he retreated, carrying the shame of survival alongside his grief. The Jedi Council convened to decide how to handle the Krath threat. The debate was extensive and inconclusive. Some argued for immediate military action. Others suggested patience and observation. Some believed the Darksiders would destroy themselves through internal conflict. Ulic listened to the arguments with growing frustration. His master was dead. The killers were known. Yet the Jedi talked endlessly about philosophy and caution, while the Krath grew stronger. He proposed a different approach. Allow him to infiltrate the Krath, pretending to defect from the Jedi Order. He would learn their techniques, identify their weaknesses, and destroy them from within. It was a strategy born from spycraft rather than Jedi wisdom, but in the emotional aftermath of Arca's death, it seemed perfectly logical. The Council refused. Infiltration required deception. Deception required lying. The path Ulic proposed was too close to the dark side, too dangerous for someone carrying fresh grief and anger. Better to wait, to plan, to approach the problem through traditional methods that did not risk another Jedi's fall. Ulic ignored their decision. He took a ship and traveled alone to Empress Teta, broadcasting his supposed disillusionment with the Jedi Order. The Kryth received him with suspicion rather than welcome. Satal Keto, paranoid and cruel, subjected Ulic to tests designed to break anyone who retained loyalty to the light, torture masked as initiation, commands to commit atrocities as proof of commitment, each test more horrifying than the last. Ulic endured, telling himself he was maintaining cover. Every compromised principle was temporary. Every act he committed while pretending to be Kryth would be atoned for after the mission succeeded. The deception would be worth it when he finally destroyed these murderers from within. But the Krythi had a weapon beyond simple torture. Satal injected Ulic with a poison derived from Sith alchemy, a substance that physically altered his connection to the Force. The poison magnified emotions, particularly rage and hatred, while dampening compassion and patience. It did not create darkness where none existed, but it amplified what was already there, feeding on his grief for Arca, his hatred for the Kryth, his shame at having survived when his master died. The changes were subtle at first. Ulic found himself enjoying the violence he committed as cover. The rage he channeled felt clarifying rather than corrupting. The Krath philosophy, which had seemed obviously twisted when he arrived, began making a certain sense. Emotion did provide focus. Passion did grant power. Why had the Jedi spent so much effort suppressing their greatest strengths? Alima Keita recognized the poison's effectiveness and decided to accelerate Ulic's corruption. She seduced him, not just physically, but philosophically. She showed him how powerful they could become together. She promised him that with their combined strength, they could reshape the Empress Teta system into something better than either the Krath or Jedi could create separately. Her lies were effective because she believed them herself. Across the galaxy, Exar Kun sensed a kindred spirit falling toward darkness. He reached out through the Force, making contact with Ulic, establishing a connection between two Jedi who had both chosen to embrace what they had been taught to fear. When Kun proposed they meet, Ulic agreed immediately, curious about this other who seemed to understand what the Jedi Council could not. They met on Coruscant itself, each bringing forces to demonstrate their power. Korn arrived with his converted Jedi students, those who had accepted his promises of liberation through darkness. Ulic brought Krath ships and warriors. Both were arrogant enough to believe they should lead this new movement. Both were skilled enough to make that belief seem justified. Their duel in the Senate District attracted immediate attention. Two Jedi, both fallen, fighting for dominance while their forces watched. Lightsabers clashed with Force-augmented speed. Lightning arced between them. The ground cracked beneath their feet as power bled off from their confrontation. They were evenly matched, neither able to achieve decisive advantage. Then the spirit of Marka Ragnas manifested between them. The ancient Dark Lord, dead for 5,000 years, reached across time and space to anoint these two as heirs to the Sith legacy. His voice resonated with authority, accumulated across a century of absolute rule. He proclaimed Exar Kun the Dark Lord of the Sith. He proclaimed Ulic Qol-Droma his apprentice and war leader. Both men received brands on their foreheads, Sith tattoos that appeared spontaneously, marking them as chosen by ancient power. The brands burned like fire and felt like vindication. Every doubt, every moment of wondering if they had made the right choice was answered by this clear sign that they were meant for this path. Exar Kun announced the formation of the Brotherhood of the Sith, not an empire built on conquest, but a fellowship built on shared understanding. Every Jedi who felt restricted by the outdated code was welcome. Every Force user who wanted to achieve their full potential could join. Together they would show the galaxy what the Force could truly accomplish when wielded without fear or limitation. The recruitment began immediately. Kun traveled to Jedi academies, appearing in visions and dreams to students who felt undervalued. He offered them what every ambitious person desires: recognition, power, purpose, the chance to prove themselves superior to those who had underestimated them. His message was sophisticated and seductive because he believed it absolutely. Dozens of Jedi fell in the first month, then hundreds. The Brotherhood grew exponentially. As each new convert brought their own followers and contacts, Condon issued specific instructions to his new Dark Jedi: return to your masters one final time. Prove your commitment to your new path by eliminating the person who held you back. Kill your teacher and take their place. The night that order was executed became known as the Night of Betrayal. Across the galaxy, students murdered masters. Padawans struck down those who had trained them since childhood. Jedi, who had survived countless battles, died to apprentices they trusted completely. The death toll reached into the hundreds. The psychological damage to the surviving Jedi Order was incalculable. Simultaneously, Ulic recruited military allies, the Mandalorian clans, warriors without a war, eager for combat and glory. He promised them the greatest war the galaxy had ever seen, battles that would be remembered for millennia, the chance to prove Mandalorian superiority against the combined forces of the Republic. Mandalore the Indomitable pledged his clans to the Brotherhood, bringing thousands of elite warriors. The Brotherhood now commanded genuine military power. Fallen Jedi provided Force abilities and tactical planning. The Krath contributed fleets and resources from the Empress Teta system. The Mandalorians brought ground forces trained from childhood for combat. Against this coalition, the Republic seemed suddenly vulnerable, its defenses designed for isolated conflicts rather than coordinated galactic war. Exar Kun's base on Yavin 4 became the Brotherhood's heart. The temples, enhanced through Sith sorcery and constructed by enslaved Massassi, radiated dark side power, visible across the Force. Jedi who came near the system felt physically ill, their connection to the light side disrupted by the concentrated darkness. It was the perfect stronghold, defensible and terrifying in equal measure. The Brotherhood's philosophy spread through carefully crafted propaganda. They were not evil, they were liberated. They had thrown off chains that prevented sentience from achieving their potential. The Jedi Code was revealed as a control mechanism, designed to keep Force users weak and subservient. The Republic was exposed as a corrupt oligarchy that maintained power through restricting what beings were allowed to think and feel. These messages resonated particularly well with younger beings, those who had grown up in peacetime and never witnessed what concentrated darkness could accomplish. They saw the Brotherhood as revolutionary rather than destructive. They believed the promises about building something better rather than simply tearing down what existed. The Jedi Order, still reeling from the night of betrayal, struggled to organize effective resistance. Trust between masters and students was shattered. Every Jedi looked at their companions wondering if they might be the next to fall. The Republic military, designed to handle isolated pirates and criminal organizations, found itself facing a genuine peer opponent for the first time in centuries. And the Brotherhood, drunk on early success and absolute in their certainty, prepared to strike at the very heart of the Republic. They would attack Coruscant itself, decapitate the government, force a surrender that would allow them to reshape galactic civilization according to their vision. It would be glorious. It would be decisive. It would prove once and for all that their philosophy was superior. They had no idea they were following the exact pattern that had destroyed every previous Sith Empire. Unity built on darkness never lasted. Power achieved through betrayal attracted betrayal in return, and arrogance blinds those who possess it to threats they should have seen clearly. The Great Sith War was about to explode across the galaxy, and before it ended, billions would die. Ancient repositories of knowledge would burn, and the Jedi Order would come closer to extinction than at any time since their founding. The Brotherhood of the Sith struck without warning, 3,996 years before the Battle of Yavin. Coordinated attacks erupted across dozens of Republic worlds. But this was not the scattered probing of Naga Sadow's invasion. This was methodical, calculated, and terrifyingly effective. Exar Kun had studied every previous Sith failure and designed his war to avoid repeating their mistakes. Ulic Qel-Droma commanded the military campaigns with strategic brilliance that shocked Republic commanders. He had been trained by the Jedi to understand conflict resolution, which meant he understood warfare at a fundamental level. He knew how Republic forces thought, how they would respond to threats, where their defenses concentrated, and where vulnerabilities existed. Every advantage the Republic believed it possessed became a weakness to be exploited. The Battle of Foros demonstrated this perfectly. The Republic maintained massive shipyards there, constantly producing new vessels to maintain security across thousands of systems. These yards were defended by planetary shields, orbital weapons platforms, and a permanent fleet presence. On paper, they were impregnable. Ulic attacked with Mandalorian boarding parties, using a technique no one anticipated. Rather than assaulting the yards directly, his forces infiltrated months earlier as ordinary workers. They sabotaged defensive systems gradually, making each failure appear as routine malfunction rather than coordinated attack. When the actual assault came, shields failed to activate properly, weapons platforms fired at incorrect vectors, communication systems broadcast contradictory orders. The Mandalorians stormed the shipyards and captured 300 Republic warships before anyone fully understood what was happening. These were not outdated vessels, but the newest designs, loaded with weapons and ready for deployment. In a single battle, the Brotherhood doubled its naval strength, while simultaneously crippling Republic production capacity. Exar Kun, meanwhile, pursued a more insidious strategy. He traveled to Coruscant itself, walking openly through the Senate district, his Sith tattoo visible to anyone who looked. This was not recklessness, but psychological warfare. His message was clear. The capital itself was not safe. The Republic could not protect even its own government center from a single Sith Lord who chose to demonstrate his power. The Jedi rushed to confront him, setting a trap in the Senate building itself. Master Vodo Sishosk Baez, Kun's former teacher, volunteered to face his fallen student. The Krevateki Jedi understood that he would likely die, but he had to try. He had trained Kun, had seen the warning signs, and failed to act decisively. Now he would attempt to correct his mistake, or die trying to stop the monster his hesitation had created. Their confrontation happened during Ulic's trial. The Republic had captured him after the Foros attack, believing that executing one of the Brotherhood's leaders would demoralize their forces. Instead, it provided Exar Kun with perfect timing for maximum dramatic impact. He burst into the Senate hall while thousands watched, senators and journalists and ordinary citizens witnessing history. Ulic was shackled at the center of the chamber, awaiting judgment. Kun froze everyone through the Force, except the Jedi present and the Supreme Chancellor. Then he did something that would be remembered for millennia. He seized the Chancellor mentally, using him as a puppet, forcing the Republic's leader to speak Kun's words, while the entire Senate watched helplessly. The Chancellor's voice, controlled completely by Kun's will, announced the Republic's surrender, declared the Jedi Order disbanded, proclaimed Exar Kun as the new authority to whom all systems must swear allegiance. The words came from the Chancellor's mouth, broadcast across the galaxy, but everyone could see the truth. The Republic's highest office had been reduced to a toy for a Sith Lord's amusement. Then Ken killed him. Casually, almost as an afterthought, he crushed the Chancellor's skull through the Force, while still maintaining his hold on everyone else in the chamber. The message was unmistakable. Your leaders cannot protect you. Your institutions are illusions. Power is the only reality, and the Brotherhood possesses power beyond your comprehension. Vodo Sayusk Bass chose that moment to attack. His force-imbued staff moved faster than ordinary sight could track, striking at Kun from an angle designed to bypass his defenses. For a moment, teacher and student fought as equals, meeting techniques, each knowing the other's style perfectly from years of training together. Then, Exar Kun revealed his innovation. The double-bladed lightsaber, an ancient Sith design he had reconstructed from holocron descriptions, 2 blades extending from a single hilt, allowing attacks from unexpected angles. Vodo's staff, formidable against a single blade, could not defend against 2 simultaneously. Kun struck through his master's guard, the crimson blades piercing Vodo's body. The old Jedi collapsed, his staff clattering uselessly across marble floors. His last words were not a curse, but a promise. He would return. In some form at some time he would face Kun again and ensure his defeat. Then Vodo Sayusk Bass became one with the Force, his physical form dissolving. Kun freed Ulic from his restraints, and together they departed the Senate building. Mandalore, the Indomitable, and their combined forces provided cover as they retreated to waiting ships. The Republic had been humiliated before the entire galaxy. The Brotherhood had struck at the heart of civilization and walked away victorious. But Ulic's capture, even temporary, had exposed a critical flaw. He had been betrayed by his own Krath followers, delivered to Republic authorities by those who believed his hesitation showed weakness. Alima Keto, his supposed lover and ally, had orchestrated the betrayal, hoping to seize greater power within the Brotherhood by removing a rival. This internal division, so familiar from every previous Sith conflict, began spreading through the Brotherhood's ranks. Dark Jedi, who had joined believing in liberation from Jedi restrictions, discovered that their new organization demanded absolute obedience to Kun and Ulic. The freedom they had been promised was replaced by a different hierarchy, more brutal than what they had left. Meanwhile, Kun pursued his ultimate goal. The Jedi Order had scattered their knowledge across multiple worlds after the Great Hyperspace War, ensuring no single attack could destroy their accumulated wisdom. The greatest repository remained on Ossus, where the Great Jedi Library preserved texts dating back thousands of years. If Kun could seize or destroy that knowledge, the Jedi would be crippled for generations. He assigned the attack on Ossus to Alima Keto, partly as reward for her power, partly as punishment for betraying Ulic. She would lead Kryth's forces to plunder the library, while Kun coordinated other attacks. What he did not tell her was that he had given her an ancient Sith artifact, whose power she did not fully understand. Alima arrived at Ossus with overwhelming force. Jedi defenders fought desperately to evacuate the library, loading ships with holocrons and manuscripts while holding back Brotherhood troops. The battle raged through the archives themselves, ancient texts burning as lightsabers and blasters, discharged without regard for preservation. In orbit, Alima activated the Sith artifact Kun had provided, believing it would destroy the Jedi fleet. Instead, it reached out to the Kron cluster, 10 stars orbiting nearby, and triggered them to supernova simultaneously. She had no time to understand her mistake before the stellar fire consumed her ship and everything around it. The expanding wave of destruction approached Ossus at light speed. Jedi on the surface had minutes to evacuate. They abandoned the library, taking what they could carry and fleeing, as their greatest repository of knowledge was obliterated by stellar fire. millennia of accumulated wisdom, irreplaceable texts describing lost civilizations and forgotten techniques, all consumed in fire that transformed the planet's surface into scorched wasteland. The tragedy of Ossus turned galactic opinion decisively against the Brotherhood. These were not liberators but destroyers, not visionaries but murderers. The Republic, demoralized and scattered after Coruscant's humiliation, found renewed purpose. Survival demanded unity. Defense required sacrifice. The Brotherhood had to be stopped regardless of cost. Jedi from across the galaxy assembled for coordinated counterattack. They had been scattered, mistrustful, uncertain. Now they united under shared purpose. The Force itself seemed to guide their coordination, masters who had never met working seamlessly together through battle meditation. The light side was rallying its defenders. Simultaneously, the Brotherhood began fracturing from within. Ulic, still influenced by the Sith poison but increasingly horrified by the destruction they were causing, started questioning their path. Killing soldiers was one thing. Obliterating planets and destroying irreplaceable knowledge was something else entirely. Was this really building something better, or were they simply proving the Jedi right about darkness corrupting everything it touched? His doubt showed in hesitation during battles, in orders given without full conviction. His forces sensed it. Some began questioning their own commitment. If Ulic Droma, war leader of the Brotherhood, was uncertain, what did that say about their cause? Exar Kun felt his apprentices wavering and responded with increasing brutality. There could be no retreat now. They had committed to this path. Victory was the only acceptable outcome. Anything less meant their actions had been for nothing, that the death and destruction served no purpose beyond satisfying dark impulses. He retreated to Yavin 4 and prepared his ultimate technique, the same ritual Naga Sadow had attempted, draining life force from followers to achieve transcendence. Tone would become a being of pure force energy, immortal and unstoppable. The Massassi worshipped him as a god. Now he would become one in truth. The Republican Jedi, tracking his movements, assembled the largest fleet ever coordinated for a single battle. Every available ship, every Jedi who could fight, every soldier willing to face darkness converged on Yavin 4. This would be the decisive confrontation. Either the Brotherhood fell or the Republic did. Ulic Droma made his choice in those final hours. He revealed Yavin 4's location to the Republic, betraying Kun completely. The woman he had loved, Naomi Sunrider, had confronted him one last time. Rather than attacking, she had done something far more devastating. Using a technique she barely understood, she severed his connection to the Force entirely. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. Ulic felt the Force, which had been part of his existence since childhood, simply vanish. The void it left was deeper than any darkness, more painful than any wound. He stood broken and powerless, unable to sense anything beyond ordinary physical reality. And in that brokenness, clarity returned. What had he done? Master Arca was dead. His brother Kai, killed by Rulik's own hand during the madness of war. Billions dead across dozens of worlds. The great library of Ossus destroyed. And for what? To prove the Jedi Code was restrictive, to demonstrate that passion provided power. The cost was so enormous that no possible benefit could justify it. He gave the Republic everything. Yavin 4's coordinates, the Brotherhood's remaining forces, disposition, Khan's plans and vulnerabilities, and then he begged them to stop what he had helped create, to prevent anyone else from dying for the lie he had believed. The fleet arrived at Yavin 4 as Exar Kun began his ritual. The Battle of Yavin would determine the war's outcome and establish patterns that would echo for 4,000 years. The jungle moon hung against its massive gas giant parent as hundreds of Republic warships emerged from hyperspace. Yavin 4 looked deceptively peaceful from orbit, its forests unbroken except where massive temples jutted through the canopy. Those temples radiated dark side energy so intensely that Jedi throughout the fleet felt physically ill before their ships even entered atmosphere. Exar Kun stood atop the greatest temple, hands raised, channeling power through ancient Sith architecture. Below him, thousands of Massassi warriors gathered in perfect formation. They had been bred and shaped across generations to serve this moment. Each one would die today, sacrificed so their god could achieve transcendence. They went to their deaths willingly, believing their sacrifice would grant eternal glory. Republic forces deployed immediately upon arrival. Capital ships established orbital bombardment positions. Fighter squadrons dove toward atmosphere. Ground troops loaded into assault ships, preparing to storm the temples if bombardment proved insufficient. But orbital weapons could only accomplish so much against structures built through Sith alchemy and reinforced by dark side energy across millennia. The Jedi took a different approach. Masters throughout the fleet linked through battle meditation, combining their strength under Nomi Sunrider's coordination. She had never led such an effort before, but grief and determination provided focus beyond any training. Her former lover had betrayed everything they believed, had killed countless innocents, had nearly destroyed the Republic. Now she would ensure his sacrifice of the Force had not been meaningless. The technique they prepared was called the Wall of Light. Ancient Jedi Masters had used it against dark side nexuses, purifying locations corrupted by centuries of evil. It required absolute unity among participants, total commitment to the light side, and willingness to risk death if the backlash overwhelmed them. Every Jedi understood the danger. They proceeded anyway. Kun felt their preparation and accelerated his own ritual. The Massassi began dying in waves, their life force ripped from bodies and channeled upward through temple architecture into the Dark Lord at its apex. Thousands of warriors collapsed simultaneously, empty shells crumbling as their essence was consumed. The dark side energy became visible, crimson lightning arcing between temple spires, the air itself seeming to ignite. Kun's physical form began transforming. His flesh became translucent, then transparent. He was achieving what no Sith had managed since the ancient days, becoming pure consciousness, immortal spirit no longer bound by physical weakness. He could feel his power expanding, sense reaching out across light years. Soon he would be everywhere and nowhere, able to strike anywhere, vulnerable to nothing. Then the Wall of Light descended. Every Jedi in orbit released their power simultaneously, the combined energy, focused by Nomi's coordination, into a single massive surge. Light side energy, accumulated across generations of meditation and study, condensed into a beam that pierced Yavin 4's atmosphere and struck the temple directly. The collision between Kun's darkness and the Jedi light created phenomena that defied physics. Reality itself seemed to tear, the Force screaming as light and dark clashed at their purest concentration. Trees for miles around the temple ignited spontaneously, stone liquefied and reformed. The temple structure rang like a massive bell, its foundations cracking from energies they were never designed to contain. Kun's ritual was disrupted at its critical moment, his transformation incomplete. He existed between states, neither fully physical nor fully transcended. His consciousness remained bound to Yavin 4, but his body was destroyed, leaving him trapped as a spirit within the very temples he had built. The immortality he achieved was a prison rather than liberation. The Massassi were all dead, their life force consumed in the failed ritual. The temples stood silent, no longer maintained by the slaves who had built them. Jungle would slowly reclaim the structures, vines growing over dark carvings, animals returning cautiously to ground soaked in death. But Kun's consciousness remained, unable to leave, unable to act, only able to watch as centuries passed. The surviving Brotherhood forces scattered. Some fled to Coruscant, hoping to rebuild from the ancient Sith stronghold. Others disappeared into the unknown regions, becoming pirates and warlords rather than accepting defeat. The Mandalorian clans, leaderless after Mandalore, the Indomitable, died on Onderon, fragmented into smaller groups that would not reunite for generations. The Kryth dissolved entirely. Without leadership, without purpose, the aristocrats who had played at Darkness returned to conventional politics. Satel and Alima Keto were dead. Their teachings, preserved in texts, were seized by Jedi Archivists and sealed away with warnings that studying them risked corruption. Republic casualties had been staggering. Millions of soldiers dead, hundreds of Jedi fallen, dozens of worlds devastated by battles fought across their surfaces. The great library of Ossus was gone, taking with it knowledge that could never be recovered. The economic cost would take decades to repay. The psychological damage to galactic civilization was incalculable. But the Republic endured. Democratic institutions, stressed beyond anything in their history, had not collapsed. Systems that had threatened secession during the war's darkest moments chose to remain united. The military, forced to evolve rapidly from peacekeeping force to genuine war machine, proved capable of defending civilization when required. The Jedi Order faced the hardest rebuilding. The Night of Betrayal had killed hundreds of masters, creating gaps in knowledge transmission that would take generations to fill. Entire force techniques were lost because the only practitioners had fallen to the Brotherhood. Trust within the Order, once absolute, now required conscious effort to maintain. More fundamentally, the war had proven something the Jedi desperately wished was not true. Their own training created the seeds of their destruction. Every Jedi who fell had once been a dedicated student, someone who believed in their principles and worked to uphold their ideals. Yet under the right circumstances, with the right pressures, they had all chosen darkness. The Council implemented new restrictions. Emotional attachments, already discouraged, were now forbidden. Studying Sith texts, even for research purposes, became grounds for immediate expulsion. The entire philosophy shifted toward preventing falls rather than understanding why they happened. Fear became embedded in Jedi training, though they called it caution. Ulic Qel-Droma lived with his guilt. Severed from the Force, he could not sense the lives he had destroyed or the civilization he had nearly ended. This absence of feedback was its own torture. He wandered the galaxy, going to worlds he had devastated, observing the suffering his actions had caused. On one such world, he encountered a young Jedi who did not recognize him. The Jedi was angry, bitter, demanding to know why the Force allowed such evil to persist. Ulic, from his perspective, outside the Force, could finally see what he had missed during his fall. The Force did not create evil or good. It simply was. Sentient beings created evil through their choices, then blamed the Force for not preventing what they themselves had done. He tried to explain this to the young Jedi, tried to share the wisdom purchased through catastrophic failure. The young Jedi, consumed by grief for family killed during the war, did not want wisdom. He wanted revenge. He struck Ulic down, killing the defenseless man who had once commanded armies. Ulic died on an ordinary world, his name reviled, his redemption incomplete. But in his final moment, his connection to the Force returned. Just briefly, just enough to feel the greater pattern, to understand that his suffering had served purpose. He became one with the Force, his final lesson learned. The galaxy recovered slowly. The war had lasted less than 2 years, but felt like decades. Entire generations had grown up, knowing only conflict, children whose parents died in battles, soldiers whose bodies bore wounds that would never fully heal, Jedi whose faith had been shaken to its foundation. But recovery happened. Destroyed cities were rebuilt. Orphans found new families. Veterans learned to live with trauma. The Republic, tested as never before, emerged with renewed commitment to peace and unity. They had seen darkness concentrated and defeated it through cooperation. That lesson would sustain them through lesser crises in centuries ahead. On Yavin 4, the temples stood empty. Kun's spirit remained trapped, conscious but powerless. He would wait there for 4,000 years, unable to leave, unable to influence events beyond his prison. His thoughts, turning endlessly through the same patterns, achieved nothing. His power, so vast at its peak, could not affect even a single leaf beyond the temple walls. The Great Sith War was over. The Brotherhood had fallen, but the Sith endured elsewhere, hidden on distant Drummond cars, and the pattern continued, as it always had, as perhaps it always would. 3 centuries passed, Republic expanded, Jedi rebuilt their numbers and restored confidence. New generations grew up hearing stories about the Great Sith War as ancient history, dramatic but safely distant. The Mandalorians, fragmented after their defeat, slowly reunited under new leadership, and beyond the edges of known space, the true Sith Empire watched and planned. The Sith Emperor, that ancient being who had consumed a planet to extend his existence, had spent those centuries refining his grand strategy. He had studied every failed Sith invasion, analyzed every mistake, identified every variable that separated victory from defeat. His conclusion was patient and terrifying. Direct conquest was inefficient. Better to corrupt the Republic from within, turn its defenders into weapons against itself. 3,976 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Mandalorians attacked the Republic again. This time they struck methodically, conquering outer rim worlds while avoiding core territories. They appeared to be seeking glory through combat, continuing their warrior traditions. The Republic believed it understood their motives. What they did not know was that the Sith Emperor had manipulated Mandalore into starting this war as the first phase of his grand plan. The Jedi Council debated whether to intervene. The Republic military was handling the Mandalorian threat adequately. Jedi involvement might escalate what was currently a limited conflict into another galactic war. Better to remain peacekeepers rather than soldiers. The decision was careful, reasoned, and strategically sound. 2 Jedi rejected it. Revan and Malachite, both young knights with exceptional ability and absolute confidence, believed the Council was repeating past mistakes. Waiting until crisis became catastrophe had never worked. Action now could prevent greater suffering later. They gathered Jedi who agreed with them and joined the Republic military over the Council's explicit orders. Their intervention turned the tide. Revan demonstrated tactical genius that shocked veteran commanders. He won battles that should have been losses, defended positions everyone assumed were indefensible, predicted enemy movements with uncanny accuracy. Under his leadership, the Republic not only stopped the Mandalorian advance but pushed them back systematically. The war ended with Revan defeating Mandalore in single combat and claiming the leader's mask as trophy. The Mandalorian clans, bound by honor, accepted defeat and withdrew. The Republic celebrated its heroes. The Jedi Council, though disapproving of their disobedience, could not deny the results. Revan and Malak had saved countless lives. But victory had brought them to the unknown regions, pursuing the last Mandalorian forces. There they discovered something that changed everything. Evidence of the true Sith Empire, hidden for 3,000 years, still existing and preparing for invasion. Revan decided to investigate further, taking his fleet beyond charted space to find the source of this threat. He found Drummond Caius, the capital of an empire that had endured while the Republic assumed the Sith were extinct. Massive cities built on dark side nexuses, fleets that rivaled anything the Republic possessed, and at the center the Sith Emperor himself, a being of such overwhelming power that approaching him felt like standing beside a star. The Emperor seized Revan and Malak effortlessly. Their defenses, built through years of Jedi training, meant nothing against power accumulated across millennia. He broke their minds systematically, rewriting their memories, turning their loyalty toward him. When he finally released them, they believed themselves free while actually serving his purposes perfectly. Revan returned to Republic space as a conquering Sith Lord. He claimed he had found ancient technology in the unknown regions that enhanced his abilities and revealed truth the Jedi hid. His charisma, already legendary, convinced thousands to follow him. Combined with the Jedi and Republic soldiers who had served under him during the Mandalorian Wars, he commanded formidable forces. The Jedi Civil War erupted. Republic fighting Republic. Jedi fighting Jedi. Again, the pattern repeating, with slight variations but essential similarity. Revan's forces won battle after battle, his tactical brilliance undiminished despite his corruption. The Republic reeled, still recovering from the Mandalorian Wars and unprepared for this new threat. The conflict ended through intervention that seemed almost providential. A Jedi strike team infiltrated Revan's flagship and confronted him directly. His apprentice Malak, sensing opportunity, ordered the fleet to fire on Revan's ship while the Jedi were aboard. The betrayal was classic Sith, ambition overriding loyalty. The blast critically wounded Revan, and the Jedi barely escaped with his unconscious body. The Jedi Council made a controversial decision. Rather than healing Revan and risking his continued corruption, they wiped his memories entirely and implanted false ones. They turned the galaxy's most dangerous Sith Lord into an ordinary Republic soldier who remembered nothing of his past. The ethics were questionable. The results were effective. Revan eventually rediscovered his identity and chose the light side. He helped defeat Malak and destroy the infrastructure supporting their Sith Empire. But the damage was done. Another galactic war, more millions dead. Further erosion of trust within institutions that held civilization together. Unknown to everyone, Revan's true purpose during the Civil War had been preparation. The Sith Emperor had sent him to conquer the Republic rapidly, creating the unified strong government the Emperor could more easily dominate. When that plan failed due to Malak's betrayal, the Emperor simply waited. His patience was infinite. His plan spanned centuries rather than decades. 3,681 years before the Battle of Yavin, the true Sith Empire finally revealed itself. A massive fleet emerged from the unknown regions. Technology advanced beyond anything the Republic had seen. They struck at Coruscant while Republic forces were deployed defending other systems. The sacking of Coruscant demonstrated capabilities that made previous Sith invasions seem primitive. Sith troops stormed the Jedi Temple, the fortress that had stood for millennia as symbol of the Order's permanence. They burned the archives, killed everyone they found. The Supreme Chancellor, watching from the Senate building, could only witness as Jedi died defending knowledge accumulated across generations. When Sith forces finally withdrew, after taking what they wanted and destroying the rest, the temple stood as blackened ruin. The Republic had no choice but to negotiate. The Treaty of Coruscant ceded multiple systems to Sith control, granted the Empire recognition as legitimate government, and effectively divided the galaxy between two superpowers. The humiliation was total and intentional. The Sith wanted the Republic to understand its vulnerability. The Cold War that followed lasted decades. Neither side trusted the treaty. Both built military capacity as rapidly as resources allowed. Proxy conflicts erupted constantly in neutral systems, each side testing the other's resolve without triggering full war. Spies infiltrated everywhere. Assassinations became routine. The galaxy existed in permanent tension, peace maintained only because both sides feared what full war would cost. Eventually the Cold War reignited into open conflict. The Great Galactic War raged across known space, neither side achieving decisive advantage. Planets changed hands multiple times. Entire sectors were devastated by prolonged fighting. The economic strain threatened to collapse both governments. The war's turning point came through coordinated effort against the Sith Emperor himself. Republic and Imperial forces, united by temporary alliance, infiltrated Drummond Casas and struck at the Emperor directly. The being that had ruled for over 1,000 years was finally destroyed, his physical form obliterated by attacks channeling both light and dark side energy. But death, for such a being, was merely transition. The Emperor's consciousness survived, fleeing to prepared vessels, hiding among his own people. Without his unifying presence, the Sith Empire began fragmenting. Sith Lords, who had been forced into cooperation by the Emperor's overwhelming power, now competed for dominance. The Empire did not collapse immediately, but started the slow disintegration that would take centuries to complete. By 3,500 years before the Battle of Yavin, the organized true Sith Empire had effectively ended. Individual Sith Lords carved out personal domains. Some fled further into the unknown regions. Others attempted to infiltrate the Republic and build power through manipulation rather than conquest. The unified threat was gone, replaced by scattered remnants pursuing individual agendas. The Republic, exhausted by centuries of nearly continuous warfare, focused on rebuilding. Systems that had been devastated required infrastructure restoration. Populations displaced by fighting needed resettlement. The economy, strained beyond historical precedent, demanded careful management to prevent collapse. Military forces, expanded to massive size during the wars, were gradually demobilized. The Jedi Order faced familiar challenges. They had lost another temple, another archive, another generation of masters. The surviving Jedi spread across the galaxy, establishing new academies on safer worlds, distributing their knowledge to prevent single catastrophic losses. They had learned this lesson repeatedly, but somehow kept needing to relearn it. More concerning was the pattern becoming undeniable. Every few centuries, the Sith returned. The specifics varied, but the essential cycle remained constant. Jedi fell, empires rose. Wars consumed billions. Eventually the Sith were defeated, but never permanently destroyed. The darkness endured because sentient beings continued choosing it, continued believing they would succeed where others failed, continued thinking themselves exceptional enough to wield corruption without being corrupted. The Jedi began studying this pattern academically, trying to understand its nature and find ways to break the cycle. Some suggested the problem was the Force itself, that light and dark were inherently balanced, and eliminating one was impossible. Others blamed the Jedi Code, arguing that restrictions created the very temptations they tried to prevent. Still others insisted the issue was eternal, that as long as beings possessed free will, some would choose darkness. None of their theories changed the fundamental reality. The Sith kept returning, and eventually someone would have to fight them again. 2,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the galaxy fractured again, not through organized empire, but scattered Sith warlords claiming territory, fighting each other, and the Republic simultaneously. The new Sith Wars were not one conflict but centuries of grinding warfare that nearly destroyed civilization itself. Individual Sith Lords carved fiefdoms across the Outer Rim. They expanded inward, conquering systems, losing them, reconquering. The Republic responded endlessly to new threats, never eliminating the source. Entire sectors regressed as infrastructure collapsed. Knowledge was lost. Systems abandoned the Republic not through conquest but exhaustion. The Jedi transformed into warriors. Masters became generals. Padawans learned tactics alongside meditation. Temples fortified themselves. The peacekeeping order became a military organization because survival demanded it. The change violated their principles, but extinction was the alternative. 1,010 years before the Battle of Yavin, Lord Khan proposed revolution. Previous Sith empires failed through internal betrayal, hierarchy breeding competition, breeding assassination. His solution was the Brotherhood of Darkness. No Dark Lord, all Sith equals, united by philosophy rather than dominated by power. The Brotherhood attracted Sith, tired of watching empires collapse. United command meant coordinated strategy. Equal authority meant no energy wasted fighting each other. They assembled proper armies, millions of soldiers beyond just Force users. Against them, scattered Republic forces faced systematic destruction. The Jedi countered with their own army. Lord Hoth organized the Army of Light, military force structured around Jedi leadership. They would match organization with organization, fight total war, because anything less meant defeat. The conflict consumed worlds. Both sides ground each other down across decades. Battles lasted weeks. Casualties reached millions. Resources depleted. Populations were pressed into service, regardless of preparation. The war centered on Ruusan, unremarkable planet that became focal point for 7 separate battles. Its surface transformed from forests to cratered wasteland. One Sith watched carefully. Darth Bane, low-ranking acolyte, risen through intelligence rather than power, studied the war analytically. The Brotherhood was failing despite advantages. Too many Sith meant diluted power. Equal authority meant unclear decisions. Kayan's innovation was symptom, not cure. The Bane discovered ancient holocrons overlooked by others. Texts from the original Sith Empire, from Dark Lords who had ruled successfully for generations. Their philosophy was clear. Power concentrated beats power distributed. One master, one apprentice, each generation stronger than the last. Quality over quantity. He began manipulating events from shadows, encouraged Kadan's desperation, suggested ancient weapons, pointed toward techniques he knew would backfire. The 7th Battle of Ruusan approached, both armies exhausted, both commanders seeking decisive action. Bane ensured they found it. Kanan discovered references to thought bombs, ancient Sith superweapons that killed all Force sensitives within range, trapping their souls in eternal torment. Dark side energy condensed into explosive device. Bane convinced him this would destroy the Jedi while preserving Brotherhood forces through careful positioning. The lie was obvious to anyone thinking clearly. Thought bombs killed all Force users equally. But Kakan was beyond clear thinking. Years of warfare, constant pressure, watching his equal Brotherhood fracture under stress. He wanted decisive victory, regardless of cost. Bane provided justification for what Katan already intended. Lord Hoth led the Army of Light in final assault on Brotherhood positions. Jedi and Republic soldiers charged across Ruusan's broken landscape one last time. The Brotherhood met them, both sides depleted, both determined. The battle raged for hours until Khan activated the thought bomb. The detonation was silent but absolute. Reality tore. The Force screamed. Every Force sensitive within range died instantly, their consciousness ripped from bodies and trapped within the weapon itself. Jedi and Sith together, masters and apprentices, lords and knights, all consumed. Lord Hoth died. Lord Khan died. Hundreds of Jedi vanished. The entire Brotherhood of Darkness was obliterated. Their souls remained trapped, aware but helpless, suffering without end. The thought bomb sat on Ruusan's surface, pulsing with stolen life, a monument to the cost of desperation. Darth Bane observed from safe distance. His manipulation had succeeded perfectly. All rival Sith eliminated. The Jedi crippled, the galaxy believing the Sith extinct. Now he could rebuild properly. He established the rule of 2, only 2 Sith at any time. One master holding power and knowledge, one apprentice coveting both. The apprentice would eventually kill the master, proving superiority, then take their own apprentice, each generation stronger than the last. Power concentrated and refined rather than diluted. No more empires to collapse. No more internal betrayal destroying external conquest. The Sith would go underground completely, infiltrate rather than invade, corrupt rather than conquer, work across centuries toward ultimate goal, patient, invisible, inevitable. The Republic celebrated victory. The Jedi mourned losses, but believed the Sith finally destroyed. New calendar was established, marking the Ruusan Reformation. Democracy was strengthened, military demobilized. The galaxy exhaled, believing darkness had been defeated permanently. They were wrong. Darkness merely changed tactics. Bane disappeared into shadow with his first apprentice, beginning a chain that would extend unbroken for 1,000 years, each generation learning from the previous, each pair growing stronger, each master teaching their apprentice everything, knowing they would eventually be killed and replaced. The grand plan was established. Sith would infiltrate every level of Republic government, corrupt from within, turn democracy's strengths into weaknesses. When the moment finally arrived, when every piece was positioned perfectly, they would strike not with armies, but with certainty. The Republic would fall not through conquest, but through transformation, remade into empire that could never be overthrown. 1,000 years later, Darth Sidious would execute the plan flawlessly. But that story belongs to a different era, to Skywalkers and Death Stars and rebellions. Tonight's journey ends here, at the moment the Sith learned their ultimate lesson. You stand now where you began, in the Jedi Archives on Coruscant. The holocron before you fades, its red glow diminishing until only soft blue archive light remains. Master Atris approaches, her expression grave but not surprised. She has seen others complete this research. She knows what questions now burn in your mind. You understand the pattern, she says quietly. It is not question, but statement. You do understand. 6,000 years of warfare. Empires rising from Jedi who fell. Victory always temporary. Darkness always returning. The cycle seemingly eternal. Your ancestor fell during one of these wars. Their name erased. Their story forgotten. But now you understand they were not unique. They were pattern repeating. One more Jedi who believed themselves exceptional, who thought they could wield darkness without being consumed, who learned too late that corruption is not overcome through intelligence or strength of will. The Jedi Archives stretch around you, containing warnings from every era, each one saying essentially the same thing. Darkness is not external enemy to be defeated, but internal weakness to be recognized. Pride disguised as confidence, ambition masked as dedication, the belief that you are exempt from patterns that destroyed everyone before you. Walking toward the Archive's exit, you pass sealed sections containing texts from every fallen Jedi, every Sith Empire, every war that nearly destroyed civilization. The Jedi preserve these not to glorify darkness, but to remember its cost, to ensure each new generation understands what previous generations learned through suffering. Emerging into Coruscant twilight, the city planet glows as billions of lights ignite below. Life continues. Beings work, love, dream, plan futures. Most will never know how close civilization came to ending, how many times darkness nearly won, how thin the margin between peace and catastrophe. The Jedi Temple stands beneath your feet, built on ancient Sith shrine, light growing from darkness's grave. The symbolism is clear, but the reality more complex. Light and dark are not truly separate but aspects of one force. Neither can exist without the other. Neither is truly stronger, they simply are. Your research is complete. You understand now why Jedi studied darkness without embracing it. Why recognizing your own potential for fall is the only defense against falling. Why humility matters more than power and patience more than ambition. The Force flows through everything, light and dark in eternal balance, like breath, like tide, natural as life itself. What matters is not eliminating darkness, but choosing light despite darkness's seduction, not once but constantly, every day, every moment, every choice. The galaxy continues its ancient dance, stars born and dying, civilizations rising and falling, heroes and villains playing eternal roles, the Force witnessing all, neither judging nor intervening, simply being. You commit to your path, to study darkness without embracing it, to understand temptation without yielding, to remember that every fallen Jedi started noble, to guard against pride and impatience that destroyed so many before, to serve light while acknowledging shadow. May the Force be with you, in darkness and in light, as you walk the eternal path between knowledge and wisdom, between power and peace, forever seeking balance. The archives dim for meditation hours, holocrons rest in chambers, knowledge sleeps but does not die, waiting for the next seeker of truth, patient as stone, eternal as force. Your footsteps echo through temple halls toward rest. You carry wisdom of 6,000 years, understanding burden of knowledge, accepting it as necessary, for only through understanding darkness can light truly shine. The Force hums gently through everything, through temple stones, through your consciousness, through sleeping city below, through distant stars above, connecting all things, light and dark, together in perfect, eternal balance. And slowly, peacefully, sleep descends,